Welcome, everyone. The time is actually 6:47, and I'd like to call the District 204 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. So thanks for waiting. Brian, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Member Albert?
Here.
Member Beta Daniels?
Present.
Member Dillon?
Here.
Member Gretsch?
Here.
Member Kelly? Member Swinehart? And Member Thomas?
Here.
Thank you. We'll begin tonight's meeting with the agenda-related public participation. Brian, do we have any agenda-related comments tonight?
We do.
Great. I want to remind everyone that the Board of Education welcomes and encourages public comments during Board of Education meetings. There are 2 opportunities for audience members to address the board, as outlined in the agenda at the beginning and at the end of the meeting. Board rules limit individual comments to 3 minutes. While the board appreciates your participation, please understand that the board does not engage in dialogue during public comment. We take all matters seriously, and if there is a specific question or comment that requires follow-up, the appropriate board or administration contact will respond at a later time. While the board encourages constructive participation, attendees are expected to conduct themselves with respect and civility toward all in attendance and adhere to Board Policy 830. This includes not using vulgar, obscene, vitriolic, or defamatory language. Also prohibited is any conduct which berates, threatens, or intimidates a board member, staff member, student, or any other person in attendance, or which impedes, delays, disrupts, or interferes with the meeting. Any person who does not adhere to these rules and expectations will have their time for addressing the board cut off and may be subject to removal from the meeting. And Dr. Waterman, if you can please call our first speaker.
First speaker is Mike Halfling. Okay, looks like
Okay,
Mike's
we'll
here.
move on to the next.
Our second speaker is Sheila Jursich.
Good evening. I'm going to speak quickly because I know we have a 3-minute limit. But good evening. My name is Sheila Jursich. I'm a parent of 2 children who have graduated from LT, and I have another child who is a rising junior. Today I come before the Board of Education with ongoing concerns regarding the grading policy and the negative consequences of this approach. I understand that the premise of the grading shift was an effort to promote equity and inclusion for all students, and to that end, I will read a portion of the equity statement on the LT website. We understand the impact all of our decisions have on our students, their families, and our communities. Decisions will be made to advance success, promote growth, and support social and emotional health of all LT students. Improving academic achievement and promoting student engagement in all LT has to offer remain top district priorities. We will continue to partner with associate schools, colleges, community agencies, and others continually to enhance student opportunity, improve students' preparedness, and provide positive learning environments for all students at LT. As I review and consider this statement, I do not see this aligning with the approach administration has taken with the grading system. The impact on students, families, and teachers has been detrimental. The community has spoken out about how negatively this approach has impacted their children. However, it has fallen on deaf ears. We do not agree that you understand the impact of your decisions at this point. In terms of improving academic achievement and promoting engagement in all LT has to offer is also in question. Currently, students' academic behaviors are not prioritized, and many students have become disengaged in the learning process. The learning process consists of gaming the system and achieving the highest possible grades on summatives, if not the first time, the second time. They have heard loud and clear that homework and attendance is not a priority of the administration, nor is it a priority for the Board of Education. And this has resulted in significant numbers of students not engaging day-to-day in activities of learning. As a parent and a high school educator, I understand that formative work such as homework and quizzes are the building block of mastery of concepts. Formative data tells teachers what students understand and what they need to reteach. This is essential in the educational process. Informative assessment and students' behaviors, such as completing homework and taking quizzes, should be a grading priority at LT. As a high-achieving high school district, the community expects that you are providing an education to our children that will prepare them for post-secondary endeavors, and that this is an area that is most concerning to me. We are dismissing students from being accountable for their responsibilities as students, and we are not exposing them to experiences that will prepare them for the realities of the work world or higher education. I implore you to stand behind your words and partner with this community in order to prepare our students for life beyond high school. Thank you.
Brian, do we have another speaker?
Tina Happel. Tina Happel.
Hi, I'm a parent of two girls, a graduate, a daughter from 2020, and I have a rising senior. And I kind of come here more as a community member because I consider myself a moderate. I think a lot of LT parents are this way. And my biggest concern as a community member is I feel like the board and the administration is losing the middle. I'm very concerned for the community. I've been in communities where people didn't go to the local high school. This is why many of us moved out to this area. I'm concerned if you have a gen ed student parents. Of the years I've been an LT parent, I've never seen such a grassroots concern from parents about what is going on. I have big fears, and big fears for the community. We are losing the middle. We need to adjust quickly. And I implore you to make sure that we allow, there are more forthcoming changes to happen for this coming school year. Teachers need to have more thought, more participation in what the grading should be going forward. I don't believe there's a perception they are being listened to. And we need to put back those motivation factors that so many students, teachers, and parents are stating are not working, which is, as we've all heard, attendance matters, homework matters, and if you want to do a retake on the theory of keep learning, maybe make it a hybrid. I mean, only a couple times a semester having retakes, but everyone should have a final. Cumulatives are important. We need to prep them for college. So I just implore you, we are losing the middle. We really need to make changes for this upcoming school year with the changes that many of these parents and teachers and students have outlined. And the other fear I have is also on attendance. I called my daughter in for attendance during finals. I felt she went to school 2 weeks less than everybody else that was peers in other districts. It felt wrong. And the person on the other line said, oh yeah, attendance is a mess. I talked to the APs about, hey, we need to get control of this. There seems to be no control over attendance. That is another perception. So we need to work on that. So I thank you for your time. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but I have the perception now that the board isn't moving fast enough. And I really think there needs to be adjustments to that this year.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Is that anyone else?
There are no other speakers.
Thank you. That concludes our agenda-related public comments tonight. First up, under agenda items, we're going to be discussing strategic plan as an action item. The consideration of the LTHS strategic plan. Dr. Waterman.
Thank you, President Dillon. I'm going to give Laura a chance in the back to fire up the PowerPoint, if she can.
It was ready to go earlier.
Yeah, there we go.
Tornado.
So, yeah, I mean, brought this to the board several times over the last several months and communicated to the community, maintained a website, but we're now to the point where we're certainly excited because we have a chance to present the final version of our strategic plan tonight for board consideration of the plan. So I'm going to just kind of briefly share the journey we've been on, and this sort of stretches back to October when we first made the decision to partner with Consortium for Educational Change in the strategic planning process, and really.
Oh, jeez. Is that legit? We should go. All right, everybody down to
Yep.
the tunnel. Does everybody have access to that?
We're going to need everyone to go downstairs where you were before the meeting, and we'll go into recess.
We're good? Okay, let's try this again. The time is 7:35. I think we can resume our agenda items. First up is strategic plan, action item. It is the consideration of the LTHS strategic plan. Dr. Waterman.
Thank you, President Dillon. I appreciate everyone's patience as we work through the weather. So, as I was saying before we got delayed, we set out this year to embark on a strategic planning process from a district-wide perspective. And really, our goal was to answer three very important questions. Where are we as a school community? Where do we want to be? And then how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? And so, really, the four primary, I'm going to go through a presentation pretty briefly, but then get to the point where excitedly, we'll be able to share the work that a team of 85 have done over the last 5 months. And so the four main pillars of this plan that we're asking the board to consider this evening is the mission part, which is, who are we and why do we exist? The vision part of what must we become, that aspirational aspect of what do we aspire to be? The values part, which is how should we behave in order to realize that mission and vision? And then what are some primary goals and some aligned strategies that go along with, that will help us accomplish our overall vision as a school community? So that's, as I said before, we partnered with Consortium for Educational Change to do this work, and the process is built upon those four pillars. So the schedule that we've used over the last 5 months is we first launched this process right after the holidays in January, and we solicited interest from our entire community. We sent out postcards, we sent emails out, communication, social media, all in an effort to attract people to want to be a part of this journey. And so we identified 85 people that started with an orientation. It was a virtual orientation on January 31st. And that was really more to just set the stage and share the work that was going to be ahead. We had a data retreat on February 24th, a vision retreat on March 17th, a setting direction retreat on April 19th, and then we had a final meeting, virtual meeting on Zoom on May 11th. And so the strategic plan team as I mentioned, 85 total people, made up of current students, parents, community members, and alumni, both parents that are current parents, but also parents that are future parents at maybe your elementary school at this point. And then we had staff, all work groups represented, certified staff, teachers, counselors, social workers, buildings and grounds, paraprofessionals, administrative assistants, student assistants, the whole group. And then, of course, our board and administration had representatives on the strategic plan team as well. So I've included a couple of slides that just show some pictures. The next couple of slides show pictures of our setting direction and our data retreat that happened throughout the spring, to give you an idea of kind of what the setup was. But we met all 3 times at South Campus in the library. And then to drill down into the purpose of each of the retreat. First of all, on February 24th, we hosted a data retreat, and the primary question there was, where are we? We were able to administer a stakeholder survey in late January. That was one really important component of the current perceptions. We also looked at student achievement data. We looked at culture, climate, and environment data as well, and then finance and facilities and technology data as well. And so the strategic plan team spent the morning reviewing, analyzing, and discussing those 4 points of data, and then spent the afternoon developing a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or a SWOT analysis, which identified, again, those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Once that was completed, we sent that to the community and essentially said, check our work. Like, was the strategic plan team on point with identifying the SWOT? We received feedback from that, and then that led us into the March 17th retreat, which was all about setting the vision and looking ahead to answering that question of where do we want to be. A part of that retreat included identifying the important characteristics that we want our students, our adults, and our system as a whole to be made up of. And so that happened not only with the strategic plan team on March 17th, but we also did focus groups with staff and with students in early April to get their feedback, and that led to the development of those portraits that you see in the final version of the plan. So essentially what that led us to then was creating a draft of the plan, which happened at the April 19th meeting. That was the version that we shared with the board at the April board meeting. And as you can imagine, throughout this process, we've seen different iterations of the final version of the plan. And so our mission, as we present it tonight, our mission as it evolved throughout the process ended with honoring our tradition of excellence, fostering innovation, and empowering all students in their quest for the fulfilling life. That's essentially what the strategic plan team identified as the reason why we exist. And you'll probably remember a lot of discussions throughout the spring on that idea of tradition, and including tradition versus excellence. And I think the team did a great job of kind of capturing both sides of that input, and I think landed in a really good spot with, again, honoring our tradition of excellence, fostering innovation, and empowering all students in their quest for the fulfilling life. Then, to narrow it down a little further, our motto, Vita Plena, the quest for a fulfilling life, has been around for a long, long time. We felt like really important to continue to honor that as a motto. And then we also want to be about excellence, innovation, and empowerment are really the 3 pillars there that came through in our motto. Our vision, what we aspire to be, very simply, we want all students to graduate prepared for life, career, and college success. And so that's that aspirational piece that we believe is very important. And then you'll see the next couple of slides, which is our LT graduate portrait. We want our graduates to be life, career, and college ready. We want them to be empowered and self-sufficient. We want them to be critical thinkers and problem solvers, effective communicators, adaptable and resilient, culturally competent, inclusive and empathetic, and then personally responsible as well. And then the adult portrait, which is those characteristics that we want every adult who works at LT to be, and that's that passionate about teaching and learning, ethical and trustworthy, prepared and professional, an engaged collaborator, effective communicator, respectful of students, parents, and one another. Again, that culturally competent, inclusive, and empathetic, It's really important. And then we want that adult portrait to include innovator, fostering continuous improvement, and individually and collectively responsible. Then as a system, who are we about and what are the characteristics of our overall District 204 system? That really should be putting students first. We should be valuing and supporting our staff. We want to ensure that clear purpose and focus, which we hope this strategic plan provides to us. We want to value collaboration, shared decision-making, and continuous improvement. Provide clear communication and value voice and feedback. Promote consistent policies, procedures, and practices. We want to value equity, diversity, belonging, and a sense of community. And then we, of course, want to responsibly allocate resources as well. So our core values are all about excellence through continuous improvement, connected families and a collaborative community, innovation, relevancy, and readiness, healthy relationships to ensure trust, respect, and engagement, equity, inclusion, and cultural competence, and clear communication and effective collaboration. So that was all the work that really was completed on April 19th. That mission, vision, values, portraits, and core values, which is such a critical part of the overall strategic plan, but also half of the document that we're presenting tonight. Moving on from April then, the team really dug into, okay, now that we've identified and articulated who we aspire to be and what our characteristics are, now how do we get there? What goals should we identify? And then maybe more importantly, what are the strategies we need to implement in order to realize those goals? So that led us into the last part of the plan, which the team identified 5 overall goals that we felt like were the most important. And that first one is related to student growth and achievement. We want to provide a comprehensive, innovative education for every student to ensure that all students grow and achieve. Goal 2 is related to our learning environment and the supports. We want to provide a safe, positive, inclusive, and engaging learning environment. Goal 3 is related to a high quality and diverse staff. So we want to invest in our staff and culture to ensure innovation, collaboration, and accountability. And then the family and community partnerships was goal 4. We want to partner with families in the community to support and expand learning opportunities for all students. And then goal 5 is around resource effectiveness and efficiencies. We want to allocate those necessary resources to maximize educational success for all students. And you'll see throughout the strategies that all of the strategies are aligned to those goals. So we have 13 total strategies that our team has identified, the strategic plan team has identified, that we feel if we're able to implement these strategies over the next probably 5 years, we're looking at this as a 5-year plan, then we will have success in achieving, in accomplishing the goals and ultimately achieving the vision that's laid out in the mission, vision, values, and the portraits. So I want to talk just briefly about some next steps, some immediate next steps. One of the things that we will do as a team is we'll take this strategic plan and we'll identify who the goal champions on our leadership team are for each of the goals. We will identify who the strategy leaders or co-leaders are for each of the strategies identified. We'll put together action planning teams for, initially we'll put it together for some of the strategies. Again, this is a 5-year plan, so we don't believe that we're going to accomplish everything we set out to accomplish in this year. It's going to be a 5-year plan. And then I think the most important part, or the part that excites us, is the development of a district scorecard that will go along with this. And the scorecard is going to honor 3 really important points. It's going to honor the data that the strategic plan team identified as key performance indicators. It's going to honor the data that we're measured on according to the Illinois School Report Card. And then those metrics will include both summative lagging indicators, but also some formative leading indicators that we can measure progress as well. So that's a lot. I would say to end, before I open this up for questions and really share what we're here tonight for, is I can't express enough my appreciation for 85 members of the strategic plan team being willing to give up 3 full days of their time, plus 2 evenings, plus all of the time in between reviewing articles, looking at research, having those discussions, and being willing to come to the table to really dig into this. And then, along that same lines, we have 3 different times throughout this process, we shared this with our community and asked for feedback through surveys. And, obviously getting a ton of really good feedback on that is something we also appreciate. I think we sent out, over the life of the spring, we sent out 54,000 postcards. Literally tens of thousands of emails and surveys were administered and collected. And so the goal going into this was a couple really important things to me, is valuing the voice of our community and making sure this plan represents that voice, but also making sure that it's an authentic plan that represents the input that we received every step of the way. And so we feel like, I know personally, I'm excited about it, and I feel like we were able to do that, and we're excited tonight to present this for board consideration. So with that, I'll open it up for questions and go from there.
Thanks, Brian. That was, yeah, I think it was really ambitious to get to this point, and I think it was really comprehensive, so I'm really appreciative of your time, the team's time, and then, of course, all the community feedback that was received as well.
Brian, can you tell me more of, I know you hit on the scorecard, the district scorecard. Is that something we'll be looking at like every 6 months, every quarter? How does that work, and how does, whether it's the board or the community, how do we get that?
So it'll be readily available on our website. So once it's developed, which I'm gonna set a target date for us of mid to late fall, that it will be completely publicly ready. We're starting to look at different metrics now, but I'm pretty confident by late fall we'll be able to have it published. And then it will always be, so anyone can look at it on the website. I would anticipate, and this is something I think the board should talk about at our workshop coming up in a couple weeks, but we probably want to build a calendar around it. And maybe I don't know that it's feasible to talk about the scorecard during a meeting, because there's going to be potentially 30 to 40 metrics. We probably want to identify like by goal maybe, like 1 month we talk about goal 1 month we talk about goal 2. So I think that's something that the board will want to talk about here in a few weeks.
Give me an example of like what a metric would be.
I'm trying to think. So we just started doing this work last week. Like for family community partnerships, we want to look at, one of the things we want to look at is electronic engagement. So whether it's website hits or social media or email responses, I think that would be one example. Student achievement, goal 1 is going to be SAT performance on ELA and science. There's a metric around GPA. There's a metric around advanced placement participation. So that would be for goal 1. Goal 5, which is finance and resources. And that, actually this is the case for all goals, but the Illinois School Report Card already measures schools on certain metrics, and we really tried to focus on that because that's what's publishable to our community as well. But we wanted to incorporate that with some key performance indicators that the strategic plan team identified as well. So like operating expenditures. Brian, what were some of the other ones we talked about for goal 5?
We had technology.
Technology, fund balance.
Fund balance.
Number of days of operating capacity. Like that would be a fine.
Cash on hand to
yep.
revenue and expense, those types of things. So, which will relate to the financial profile score that the state puts out on an annual basis.
We've also incorporated some of the, we anticipate giving surveys from Panorama and building in some satisfaction data through survey responses into the scorecard also. So that's represented in, and we literally just started talking about this part last week, so it's very much a draft form, but that would, that comes through in goal 2 and in goal 3 as well. But I think, I feel like if I could say one thing just about the process and about CEC's work is the key performance indicators, when we first started talking about them, and I think at the April meeting, it's very exciting, but you realize quickly it's going to take time to get to what the metrics are. These are not metrics. These are just these are the indicators that we want to use to build the metrics. Mm-hmm. And so, we're going to work on this over the next several months, and again, I feel comfortable by late fall, we'll be in a position where we'll have a scorecard that includes both summative and leading indicators.
Brian, could I ask a little bit? Oh, sorry. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate you walking through next steps where we take these goals and strategies, but then could you talk in a little bit more detail? You said leads would be identified. I'm curious what that process is, if there are, task teams around that, and that's really where the tactics come together, and I think that's really where this comes to life for a lot of our students and our parents and everybody. Could you give a little bit more around that and, how we'll come to learn how that all works and who's going to be involved?
So the first couple of things we've done as a leadership team, and we've started to unpack this in what we call like live the plan with our central leadership team, which is the leadership, the leaders on this stage, plus a few more. But we've done a couple of things so far. We've identified of these strategies, which ones are in the investigating stage versus the developing stage versus the implementation phase. And again, that goes back to if we want to focus on things, we can't focus on 13 things this year, right? We have to identify what we want to focus on. So we've started to identify what phase each of these strategies are in. We've started to identify who the goal champions are going to be among our leadership team, and then also who our strategy leaders will be for each one. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where we've stopped. The next step after that is for the strategies where we feel like we're implementing, we want to build an action planning team that will be representative of teachers and staff and leadership team that would go through that process to actually do the implementation of the strategy. So I think that'll evolve over the next 2 months as we head into the school year. They'll get trained through CEC on what it means to be an action planning team and what it means to go through that. And then we'll be able to, so how we've divided the indicators or the metrics are, as a leadership team, we've identified the summative indicators. We want the action planning teams to help us with the formative indicators or the leading indicators.
Okay. Thank you.
So lots of work ahead.
And so I'm just wondering what key stakeholders still get to have a voice in all of it too, and what makes sense, to bring it to fruition.
I think that's an important point because there's so much, and it seems very simple, right? Like this is a critical step, but it's just the first step. What we're doing tonight. Like, this is just the one-page document that hopefully clearly articulates what our goals and our vision is. But that's just the first step. We have so much more work to do to actually live this plan.
Brian, I agree. Thank you. First of all, it's super exciting that we have a strategic plan. It was, I think, surprising to many of us, to not have, to learn that the district has never engaged in a strategic planning process. And to your point, I think that this is a fantastic first step. It's a very high-level first step, which is great, and I appreciate all the work that everyone contributed to get us to this point. And I think that these are some of the question marks in my mind relate to the next steps and the process of, since this is just the first step, what's the process and how will the board be involved in the process of understanding what the action plans are, understanding what the KPIs are, because there was some discussion in the last meeting that was just something kind of that the strategic planning team embarked on for a very short time. We weren't, we wanted more depth, more information, more agreement on whether or not those are the right KPIs. And I think, this is the first time we're seeing the strategies and the goals in this format. So I think it's great, and I'm excited to see a lot of things on here. But the next steps in the process that you and your team take afterwards are probably even more important than this.
Absolutely.
And so what's the process? And you said something about building a calendar around the scorecard. I mean, the scorecard is great, but it's going to be very important that I think that there's alignment and agreement among the board and you and your team that we're focusing on the right things and that we have the proper data behind it, the proper KPIs behind it. So if you can elaborate a little bit more about like what you'll do and when you'll bring this back in front of the board to share with us some of the important next steps.
Yeah, I would anticipate the fall looking like this last spring, where either every other meeting or every meeting we're giving an update on kind of where we are with strategic plan. We do want to make sure that we honor, when we're creating metrics, we want to make sure that we're honoring this work, but to us, what's really important is the Illinois School Report Card and the equity journey continuum that we're now going to be graded on in October. So we're going to get a score in 3 different areas of the equity continuum. We're also this Illinois School Report Card looks different this year than it ever has. And so last week, our team spent 2 whole days identifying the initial metrics for each of the goals. And we wanted to make sure we looked at it through that lens. So we're developing drafts of this, and then, like I've done in the spring, I'm going to continually check that with the board, whether that's through weekly updates or through board conversations, to say, here's where we're at. But we do want to really focus on honoring those 2 areas, because like I could not do that, or as a board or as a leadership team, we could identify the metrics that we value or that we think are important, but we want to make sure that we're using the lens of this strategic plan and of the Illinois School Report Card.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also think it's going to be important to provide to the board regular insight as to, if it's a 5-year plan, you're going to have to make some decisions about what you're engaging upon first. Right. So you mentioned something like, in process of implementing and so forth. So all that information, those sort of details of like whether you call them an action plan or administrative plans or whatever, I think that would be very important to get in front of the board and get some buy-in and have the opportunity to discuss and ask questions. But I think this is fantastic. And it's just really, really encouraging. It gives everyone in our community, students, teachers, administrators, community members, and parents a common language and a common understanding of at a high level where we're going. So, really great job. I'm thrilled that we're sitting at this spot discussing this right now.
I think, and another point I want to make is, from a communication perspective and from a sharing perspective, we fully recognize that it's June 13th right now, and we'll probably wait until August to really celebrate this with our community and share it with our community in a way that's more intentional at the beginning of the school year rather than the middle of summer. So that's kind of what we're working on this summer too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for putting this together and explaining everything. While we have the momentum going, I just want to make sure that we have a plan, because this is only a 5-year plan. What do we look for? Do we have a plan how do we stage it so that we renew it, so that we're not one of the districts that hasn't updated it in 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, I
Not
could
to say that we're going to be, but just,
Yeah, I would imagine that once we get a few years into this, we're going to start looking at the end of that 5-year window and either re-engaging with CEC my guess is we won't have to do the significant amount of work that we did this spring, but we should be able to update it by getting input, probably putting a team together, but that's something I feel like we can focus on.
as long as there's like a plan for that, so like we have in, I don't even know what year it is, like 2020 for 5 years from now.
We're looking at like a
2020.
22 to 27 plan, but
Like if we look at
that's
26,
the part that's
25.
fluid. Like we may be making tremendous progress on these goals and we may extend it, or we may not make progress and we want to, this is going to change, right? It's changed so many times since January, and we know that this is going to change.
And I just want to have like a process in place so that we can have that flexibility and that availability to review it and to revisit it. And that's different, I think, than what people have spoken about with the markers and the metrics. But is it still going to be relevant in 4 years, 5 years?
Well, I know my recommendation, and this is something that the board is going to want to discuss, but, as of a year ago, the board's goals expired, and this board's not had that discussion about what the new board goals are. My recommendation would be these are the board goals.
Right.
And so the board should be discussing that on an annual basis, discussing progress towards the goals, and rather than, I just don't think it would make sense to reinvent the wheel. So that's the process you're talking about.
absolutely.
Annually, the board would look at progress made towards each of these 5 goals.
And I would just ask for us as a board to, and for those that might not be, there might be none of us here in 5 years, that there be that plan and that succession plan to keep this moving and to keep it updated.
It's a great point, Jill.
Thank you for all your work, and for everybody's work, for everybody involved.
Brian, could I ask another question to back up? Because you mentioned that 2 key two key components that you and the team are looking at are from the state, the equity continuum and the Illinois scorecard.
Yep.
I don't know that we've had a ton of conversation about the details around that, so I just wondered if we might, and if there's a way even for, if that's connected on our website somewhere too, so I'm sure that if there's a way for us to kind of dig into it a little bit on our own, if that's not going to be a conversation tonight probably, but down the road.
Yeah,
to help understand
Well,
how they fit
new-
together.
Yeah, and it's redesigned for October of 2022. So when we bring this information to the board in the fall, we will be reporting on those metrics included in the report card and the equity continuum.
So that's the October meeting
that's
we
the
had with
October-
all the data, and
Yes.
now it's going to look
It's
different
completely
this
new
fall.
this year.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
completely new.
But we did not look at that in this past year.
No.
We didn't see it, but there is,
There's a
yeah.
brand new report card coming up.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
there's,
Some of
There
the data
was
is
one
already.
for October 2021, 2022 school year. We
Yeah,
just
we didn't get it. When did it come in? It didn't come in until December this year, right? Everything was delayed.
Yeah, based on the way the different schools did their testing, there was delayed testing. They didn't send out any final version until the spring. So even what we had in the fall was spotty. And if you go on it now, there are whole chunks that say this data was not collected this year. So it's kind of an incomplete report card.
My goal is that annual presentation in the fall doesn't look anything like it's looked previously, and then it's based upon the new Illinois Score Report Card and Goal 1 of the strategic plan.
Yeah. and-
Otherwise, then the work we did here is, I mean, that's what I would say. But
No,
again,
and I think that makes sense. I just don't want to lose sight of different metrics that have been available for the 2021, 2022 school year. And even though it's a new report card, there's high value in understanding the trends over history to the degree that we can. Obviously, it makes it very difficult if they've changed the entire report card, but I would imagine some critical data that we'll see in the new report card will have been in the other report card. And it
Absolutely.
seems like a little bit of the data that you all did in your data retreat. The only piece that I recall the board having a discussion on is the SAT performance data. We didn't have a board discussion on the AP data and some of the other things, and I think that's,
I thought
for
that
me.
was included in the October report, though, the AP data. Is that not in there? Was
Yeah.
it in there?
was.
Yeah, I think it was in
Oh,
there.
was it?
was AP
Okay.
data.
I don't recall. I'll go back and look. But if there's anything that we missed in that data dig that we didn't discuss, I just don't want to lose sight of our 2021, 2022 important data that is, just because we're going into a new year. So, I'll look back over it. I clearly remember the SAT, math and ELA college readiness discussion that we had, but I don't recall the in-depth data that I saw as part of the strategic plan. So if we did miss it, it would be good to maybe backtrack over that to some degree, even if it's in.
It was there, yeah.
And then, Jill, to your point, I think giving more information to the board about the new report card, and that's on our list.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, would you like us to send you a couple of just sources from ISB about the equity continuum? We can send those, just prepare those and send them to you.
That would be great.
We'll go ahead and do that. You got it.
Yeah, I've seen emails, I think, come through on that, so I know there's resources available online with that information. Thank you. Great.
That'd be great.
Okay. Well, with that, guys, then I would like to read a resolution and ask the board to adopt the resolution as presented. So I'm going to begin it now. Whereas Lyons Township High School District Number 204 launched Inspire LT, a stakeholder-engaged strategic planning process in January 2022. Whereas the Inspire LT team throughout the last 5 months partnered with District 204 School Community and Consortium for Educational Change to answer 3 critical questions. Where are we? Where do we want to be? And how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? Whereas through in-person, full-day retreats, administration of surveys, and focus group feedback, the Inspire LT team worked collaboratively to identify our school's community strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, SWOT, then utilize that information to develop a draft version of a long-term comprehensive strategic plan. Whereas the resulting development of a one-page front and back document that articulates our mission, vision, motto, portraits, graduate, adult, and system, core values, goals, aligned strategies, and key performance indicators is an initial important step in the strategic planning process. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education of Lyons Township High School, District 204, Cook County, State of Illinois, adopts the LTHS strategic plan. Is there a motion to approve the resolution as presented?
So moved.
Second.
And Brian, can you please call the roll?
Yes, if I can find the right paper here. So that was so moved
Filling in
by
for Marilyn
Diane.
tonight.
So, by Jill, right, and then second by Allison? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Member Albert?
Yes.
Member Beta Daniels?
Yes.
Member Gretsch?
Yes.
Member Kelly?
Yes.
Member Swinehart? Member Thomas?
Yes.
And Member Dillon?
Yes. Great, thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing that again in August. Our second agenda item is a 2022-23 grading practices adjustment. Scott Eggerding.
And Dr. Jenstrow.
Oh, Dr. Tyrell, too.
Thank you, President Dillon. I'm going to kick us off tonight by talking a little bit about the gradebook audit that we completed over the course of third and fourth quarter this year. Before sharing some of the themes that emerged from our collective gradebook audit, I want to reemphasize some points of feedback that we received throughout the course of first semester, as well as share or reshare one of the points of clarification that we made for second semester, and I think that that sets the stage for the context for our audit. By and large, students and families consistently shared 2 points. First, more summatives in the gradebook is better, and second, students having the opportunity to demonstrate their learning through multiple types of assessments is better than having the opportunity to only demonstrate their learning through one type of assessment. In December, we provided a point of clarification to staff, students, and families with the aim of, 1, increasing the number of summative assessments in gradebooks, thus giving students many opportunities to demonstrate their learning, and 2, diversifying the types of assessments that students had the chance to engage with in order to demonstrate their learning. So number of assessments and types of summative assessments were 2 areas of focus as we moved from first semester into second semester. The following is the part of the December communication that set the stage for second semester, and I'm only sharing the points of clarification that most align to our work within the gradebook audit. There were a few other points of clarification that we shared moving from first semester to second semester. But that point, summative assessment types, presentations, quizzes, lab reports, performance assessments, essays, and traditional tests will be counted as summative assessments. All summative assessments, regardless of type, must be preceded by formative practice and feedback. And then a note, quizzes can be used by a teacher as a formative assessment to inform teaching, or they can be used by a course team as a summative assessment to measure student understanding. And as I'm sure everybody around this table remembers, we made those changes pretty late in December as we closed out first semester and prepared for second semester. And as we shared in the memo that was provided to you, I think it's really important to note that our course teams, our teacher teams, did not have a significant amount of time to work in preparation for those second semester changes. In light, though, of that short turnaround, our teachers did a tremendous job with both increasing the number of summative assessments as well as diversifying the types of summative assessments that they used during the second semester, and we are extremely proud of that work. The purpose of the gradebook audit that we engaged in was twofold. First, to analyze how PLC teams operationalize the clarification around number and types of assessments, and most importantly, as a lot of our work is, to ensure that we could support teams in the best possible way through identifying professional development and learning opportunities. The gradebook audit was completed by division chairs during the latter part of the third quarter and beginning of the fourth quarter during the 21-22 school year. And the data collected from the gradebook audit is snapshot data that was collected at a moment in time. As we know, gradebooks and grade entry is a rather fluid process, so the timing of that also gives us a certain point of information. Each division chair completed the audit during approximately a 4-week period, a 4-week window of time. And like I said, gradebook and grade entry is fluid, so we would expect to find some level of inconsistency inconsistency, even when we looked at grade books of teachers that work on the same course team, even for our teams that are really consistent because of just timing of assessments, timing of entry of those grades. The following themes, which I'm really excited to share with you tonight, emerged from our audit. When reviewing all courses within our curricula, an overwhelming majority of course teams had more than 4 summative assessments entered within the grade book. And I strategically selected the number 4 because depending on the timing that the division chair completed the audit, this would equate to approximately 1 summative assessment being entered into a grade book for every 2 to 3 weeks of instruction. And the grade book audit, like I said, was completed at the end of 3rd quarter into the 4th quarter over a 4-week period. So for those that were done right at the end of 3rd quarter, that would project into approximately 8 summative assessments for the entire semester. Course teams utilized a variety of assessment types, and I think this is really exciting work to share with you during the 2nd semester of the 21-22 school year. As you see in the memo, I broke down the information by department and in some cases division to share the types of assessments that we found within our grade books. And I'll summarize that for you a bit tonight. Math, primarily tests and quizzes, were the 2 methods of assessment used, and it's important to note that members of our math department participated in a summer workshop just last week or the week before in order to talk about developing diverse assessments, and this is work that will be shared with course teams in our math department through the 2022-2023 school year and in preparation for the year. Science, within the memo, I failed to break down the science information for you, but it's important to share that many of our science classes utilized alternative forms of assessment, so I lumped math and science together in the memo. If I would have broken down science, you would have had additional information. So science, we found labs, projects, papers, research, and practicals, along with quizzes and tests, were forms of assessment used in science. World languages, presentational, interpretive, and interpersonal assessments. Fine arts, performance-based assessments such as projects, performances, skill checks, presentations. LAD, our English classes, various forms of writing, research, literary analysis, speeches, presentations, projects, discussion, tests and quizzes. Physical welfare, performance rubrics, written selected response, skill analysis and projects. Global studies, which is applied tech, business, family, consumer science, and social studies. Papers, projects, debates and discussions, simulations, tests, quizzes, and a myriad of performance-based assessments, which is what we would expect from our applied tech courses, our family consumer science courses. Special education, tests, quizzes, labs, presentations, slideshow, weekly conferences, writing and reading assessments, projects, and performances. And so I think that's really exciting information to share with you. And, you know, first semester, we got some feedback about the types of assessments that kids were engaging with. And when I would meet with kids during the course of first semester, I said, well, talk to me a little bit about, you know, which classes are the best for you to demonstrate your learning. And to a kid, they shared about classes that they had the opportunity to perhaps, you know, write something, so respond through a written response, maybe participate in a test, also have some sort of discussion. So kids want multiple forms of assessment, and I think that, you know, we have a really nice, diverse list of summative assessments across our entire curricula. And we'll continue learning and continue getting better in that area as well. As division chairs collected information from the audit, they were able to engage in discussion with PLC teams and or individual teachers about number of assessments, types of assessments, and then inconsistencies that they may have seen within grade books. And that's really continued to set the table for our work in 22-23. So there were areas where we did see some inconsistencies, not a lot of them, and those conversations started as we closed out the school year and set the table for continued conversation next year. Let me see here. Division chairs also encountered the following that will inform work with their PLCs and with PLC teams in 2022-23. In some cases, formative feedback was documented in Canvas, but not Infinite Campus, so we need to make sure that that formative feedback and formative assessments are entered in spots where they're appropriately communicating students' progress in the class in both spots. In some cases, formative feedback was not documented prior to summative assessments, but through conversations in many cases, cases, we found that formative assessments were given, feedback was given, they just weren't necessarily inputted into Infinite Campus. That's a bit of a communication breakdown that we need to work on moving forward as well. And we did find a little bit of inconsistency with naming conventions, which is something that we'll continue to work on to make sure that teachers and teams have consistent naming conventions so that it's clear the assessments that students are engaging in. As we start to or continue to process through some of the findings from our audit, the following themes emerged with respect to instructor support initiatives or professional learning, continued professional development on varied performance-based assessments. We think this is really important, that we continue to have our eye on the target of a diverse list of summative assessments, continued professional development on characteristics of formative and summative and development of those formative and summative assessments, and emphasize, it's important that we emphasize the importance of communication structures for course teams in addition to PLC teams. So our PLC teams have time to meet on Wednesday mornings. Every teacher of a course is not necessarily on the PLC team. So making sure administratively that we open up communication opportunities for those teachers on course teams is really important so that they can, consistently set up grade books and make sure that they, have an opportunity to connect on the assessments that they're using within their courses. But overall, it was a really valuable experience for our administrators, a really valuable experience for me to work with our DCs across all content areas, and honestly, a lot of work to celebrate. I said it earlier, but I want to say it again. Changes were made in late December, or adjustments, points of clarification. Our teams did not have a lot of time to work on those adjustments, and they really did a nice job of operationalizing those points of clarification. I will open it up and take any questions that you might have.
Jen, I wanted to ask about what you mentioned, the importance of the communication structures for the teachers to be able to provide feedback. How will the teams be able to do that?
So the communication structures that I was referring to is to make sure that course teams have an opportunity to work together. So that's something that we're going to process through as a division leadership team. Certainly we do a nice job across all divisions of setting schedules for PLCs to meet. We will have our school improvement days as well. So those are going to be days, early release time, that our divisions and departments are going to be able to get together. So I could see those communication structures, that schedule, enhancing the communication of course teams as well. But that's something that we're going to process through as we connect and plan for the year in our summer workshop.
I was just wondering, like if an individual teacher has certain questions or something very specific, is there a way that they can communicate directly then with their?
Oh yeah, if an individual teacher has questions or needs additional support, certainly their point person would be their division chair for continued professional learning or questions that need to be answered. But they also work with their colleagues on their teams as well. But our DCs certainly are always working with our teachers on our grading practices and other curriculum and instruction work as well.
Thank you for doing all of this.
You're welcome.
I know you mentioned it a couple meetings ago, and I know we've all been eager to hear what you found out, and it makes perfect sense that there would be some inconsistencies at the different times that people are submitting grades. But overall, for lack of a better term, were those statistically significant, where if somebody went back in and took a look, would it change some of your takeaways from that exercise? Is anybody going to go back and kind of see if some of those gaps were filled in, or if it maybe brings to light, maybe a certain area needs a little bit more emphasis than we originally thought?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jill. It is a little bit fluid based on timing, but even today when I was kind of going back through some documents that we have, our DCs did a little bit of that, and there were more spots where there was inconsistency just based on the timing of the audit or where teachers were in terms of their scope or their sequence or their timing of assessment, but there were a few spots that we recognized that were some greater level of consistency. And I'll give you one example. In our English department, Karen and I were taking a look at some of our results, and we saw, a big discrepancy in number of assessments, and we realized through conversation that Karen had with one of our teachers on a team that the same assessments were being administered, but this particular teacher broke down and entered the assessments in smaller chunks. So we engaged with some things that happened like that. On paper, it might look like a greater inconsistency, but when you go back to it and you look through, kids were still engaging in taking the exact same assessment. But it's an ongoing process, it's a fluid process, and now at the end of the semester would be a time for our chairs to look back if there were any questions about consistency that may be out there, to just take a look at where things closed as we ended the semester.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And is that something they will do, Jen?
More often than not, we take a look at the end of the semester when we're looking at, final grades and, looking at grade books and stuff. It's something that's done. We haven't decided on a formal process for it, so we'll be continuing our discussion around that. More of our conversation's really going to be on supporting our teams and making sure that they have the tools and resources and professional learning opportunities to do what we're saying that we want to do, which is have more assessments, make sure that kids have authentic ways of showing us and demonstrating their learning, so that's where we're going to be focusing our attention, kind of, developing some of those professional learning opportunities, setting the stage for our PLCs and course teamwork as we start the year as well. But this is ongoing work for sure, and it's ongoing collaboration with our teams and our teachers, and continuing to make sure that we're moving in the right direction.
And is the extra time on Wednesdays a powerful opportunity for some of that?
Absolutely. I mean, we're excited to talk about that time on Wednesdays. I mean, we see some professional learning fitting in there, and important professional learning, some that's aligned to our grading practices, some that might just be aligned to other important things that you see outlined within our strategic plan as well. But yeah, Wednesdays will be PLC time, opportunities to engage in really important professional learning. School improvement days will be used for division and department collaboration. It's really exciting. It's really exciting to have those opportunities to continue to support and utilize that time.
Along the way, when you're working through all of this with the teams, I know that there are certain points in time where, looking at the grade books makes sense, but it would be really helpful, I think, to have regular conversation or reports, feedback on how things are going with the teachers, how the professional development's going, how the Wednesdays are going, how just a sense of if people are feeling like they're coming together on all of these fronts.
Absolutely. And I know Scott and some of our teachers are here to talk about some of the changes that we are making for the fall. And, that grading implementation committee is also a really important vehicle, because we're going to expand membership, as this group knows, and that is our opportunity to engage with our teachers, and they share as representatives from their departments as well. So along with us administratively seeking that voice and feedback through various different formats, working with that team is just so significantly important moving forward to make sure that their voice is represented, and that we're talking through the right items in order to make any adjustments or tweaks that we need to make moving forward. Thank you.
Jen, what is you mentioned the questions of Canvas versus Infinite Campus. Some things are put on Infinite Campus, some are on Canvas. Do we need both systems? Does that create work for teachers more than it should? And how does that work? And the other question with that is, where as parents are we actually supposed to look? Because I got a lot more information on Canvas sometimes stuff I didn't want to know. Yeah. But where are we supposed to be looking? Where are kids supposed to be looking? where a teacher's supposed to be going, it's a little confusing.
Yeah, Allison, it's a great question, and it's something that we're processing through right now. So Infinite Campus, that's the formal tool. We house all of our student information in Infinite Campus. That's the tool that, we use to create transcripts. That's the formal grade book. But Canvas is the hub. It's the learning management system, and kids really, they spend their time on a daily basis in Canvas. Our teachers spend time designing their courses in Canvas, and certainly there's a grade entry component of Infinite Campus. So it's challenging when you're navigating multiple systems, and this is not a problem, or this isn't something that's unique to LT. Learning management systems have really taken off in the last, I don't know, maybe like 10 or so years, and I think we're in great shape that we have one learning management system that all of our teachers use and kids can go to as a hub. The problem is it has been complex, and I know we're working on communication mechanisms to pass back information from one system to the next, and we're hopeful that we're going to advance those communication systems so that it makes it easier for teachers to put information in Canvas and to pass it to Infinite Campus. But when I reference some of those gaps, we had maybe some teachers or some teams that were really great about putting their summative assessments in Infinite Campus. Now, this semester, we were 100% summative grade only, right? So they were really good about putting all their summatives in. They were administering formatives. Those lived in Infinite Campus. So if you, in Canvas. So if you as a parent weren't digging in and navigating Canvas, you may not have seen all of those formatives, and you may have had the question, well, wait a second, I thought kids should have been engaging in formatives before they participate in the summative. They were. The information just 100% of the time wasn't getting carried over. I also think, Dr. Waterman and I were talking about this earlier, making sure that parents know that they can be in Canvas. That is a platform that they can go into, that they can examine, that they can look at to support their kids' learning is something that's important as well. So we need to make sure that we're communicating that to our families as well. But Infinite Campus, if families are looking for a snapshot for grade information, that's it. If they want more detail, Canvas is a nice platform. And on our end, we need to do better. We need to make sure that we have the appropriate communication to make sure that things are in both systems.
Because so I do think we should communicate more for parents to understand that Canvas, and it is a little daunting when you go into Canvas and trying to navigate through some of that system. But the other, I guess that with both of them, it's also a concern, and I kind of heard this, that it's hard for teachers to have to go through both of those systems, but that's just got to happen right now.
Yeah, one of the things when we first started was with the two systems is that the only way to make them talk to each other is if everything in Canvas was the same in Infinite Campus and all the teachers were giving the same assignments, because it was set up originally as a college system. What we're looking to do, and we've seen other schools do, the more we have those common formative elements, those will pass into Infinite Campus. So we've been working with our tech coaches and with our IT department to begin that process in the fall to get that Canvas info put into Infinite Campus. That's common. If you have a teacher who wants to give a whole bunch of extra things, that they wouldn't necessarily all pass over. But we're also looking to see how we can make that work as well. Because we have been reporting in Infinite Campus formative grades and formative assessments, even though they aren't added into the total. So the more that we can pass that and the more that teams become consistent, the more we're going to see things begin to migrate over. That being said, we're definitely, the tech coaches are going to be trying to do some experimentation in August with that, just because we don't want to turn on something brand new and then have everybody, oh my gosh, this is worse than what we had before. So, technology can help us. Sometimes it can complicate things. But from what we've seen and from what we've been told, it's possible to do. But again, our tech coaches are pretty good at knowing this is going to break it. Let me see if it really does kind of thing. So those are But it's promising. For the first time, we actually feel like we have a path forward to connect the two in a way that it hasn't before. Right now, it has been double entry. Every teacher will tell you, I put it in Canvas, I do all my speed grading in Canvas, and then I have to go and put it all in Campus. And then if a kid does a retake, I've got to change it again. And so it's a constant shift. And the view that you have for Infinite Campus is not the view that the teachers have. So it's even more challenging for them to find the right place to put it. So the more that we can systematize these things, the better, the easier it'll be for all users.
Allison, I think a very simple graphic of communication says, as a parent, here's what I should use Campus for, and here's what I should use Infinite Campus for, would probably help.
Yeah.
Yeah, definite primer. Posted on the web.
So just the one question, for the audit, I thought that also that you guys were looking at like how many teams were doing like A through F and like 0 to 100%, like within the grading.
That's not I mean, we have that information at the division chair level. It wasn't necessarily part of this part. It wasn't necessarily part of our audit.
So you're just strictly looking at the number of assessments
Sorry.
within each of the different classes.
Yep, we looked at number of assessments, types of assessments, and then formative feedback preceding the summative, formative assessment or feedback preceding the summative assessment. So those were the big components that we looked at.
We have the data on ADA, so.
Yep.
It's 30 teams. I can send that to the board again.
April's packet, I think.
But we know that. We
Right,
know
but did you send it to us broken out by the divisions?
have to go back and
Like
check,
math doing A through F or 0 to 100 or like that kind of breakdown?
No, I just sent here are the course teams we have that are using A to F, and I think it's about 30. But I'll go back and look at that.
Jen, what was that? You said something about, and it was in the memo, the inconsistency of naming. I didn't know what that was. I don't know what that meant.
So teacher teams determine the naming convention, how they're going to name a particular summative assessment that's commonly administered across the team. And it's easier to gather information when you use common naming conventions. So that's something that I believe we stressed a couple of years ago and then looked at again in the fall. And in some cases, naming conventions aren't necessarily common. So it's something that we're going to work with teams on moving forward, just to make sure that they have the same names and we know exactly, okay, this assessment aligns to this assessment administered by this team. In many cases, they are aligned, but in some cases, they're not. So it's just a small thing. And it just, as we're doing our work as teams and, as instructional leaders, consistency in that area makes things a little bit more, it articulates things a little bit more clearly.
Is that basically like a quiz versus?
Yeah, it'd be like, summative, for example, like a math unit number 4, someone may have said like unit 4 summative assessment, someone else might have said unit 4 quadrilateral equations summative assessment. So, it just granular topic versus maybe just a larger scale convention.
So you throw that in and then you really confuse me.
I should have went with physical welfare, my background, but yeah. A parent wouldn't necessarily notice because you're just looking at your child's grade book, but when we work with teams, it's something that we notice.
So, kind of in thinking about the changes that are being implemented for first semester of next year, I heard you say that the grading implementation task force will be expanded, which is great, and that will provide more opportunity to make sure that we're hearing all the concerns, the voices, and so forth. During the course of the last year that we've all been on the board, we've certainly heard a lot of parent, teacher, and student concerns that you've looked at and changes have been made. How will we know and monitor to understand if these changes are successful? And I'm thinking about it specifically, and I'm running through in my mind trying to figure out, ways to do it. I'm thinking about specifically the fact that we heard from teachers that students weren't engaging in the homework and weren't engaging in the critical tasks that are defined as part of the learning process. Said that they were not as engaged when they hit the first summative, didn't do well in the summative, which got us into this endless cycle of retakes. Second semester, some changes were made, which, you know, I don't think we tracked retakes or necessarily, and I'm not even sure that even tells the full story, right? So what kind of metrics, what can we look at? What can you look at and help us to understand if these changes have really been effective and have kind of, you know, led us in a different direction where we think that I think what's most important, I hear people say accountable, and that is important because that is part of life, and the kids are going to be held accountable, but for me, it's always been like engaging in the learning process, and are they learning the material towards mastery in a way that they're going to retain it and do well and, you know, foundational to their next steps. What do you think? Sorry, that's a lot.
It is a lot. I might pass the mic on that one. No, Dawn, are you referring to the changes that we're going to present, like, upcoming here and then talk about for implementation in 2022, 2023?
Yeah, I guess I jumped ahead. I apologize.
No, that's okay. It might be beneficial to have Scott and our teachers outline those changes and then kind of give everyone an opportunity to think about it, and then we can kind of process back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. My apologies.
No problem at all. Just want to make sure we're referencing the same changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have some questions about the gradebook audit observations.
Okay.
So, initially you had stated that, you know, what you had noted that there are more summatives and different types of summatives. So would you be like making a recommendation, because you said the majority had more than 4 summatives, but that makes me concerned that maybe one class had 1 summative or something like that. So would there be a standard going forward of how many summatives? Would you recommend that, or would you see that when you were looking at that?
It's a good question.
Does it vary from math and science to English?
Right, for
So
this.
4 is,
Even prior to this year, we said, you know, you really need to have at least 4 summative assessments. We had some teams that had really big sort of projects, so they had something like a mid-quarter and a quarter, and then a mid-quarter and a semester. So that's really been the minimum that we talked about, was 4 summatives total. But then we certainly saw an expansion of that second semester, which is what we were hoping to see.
okay, because it says an overwhelmingly majority of course teams had more than 4, but your floor
In
is
the
4.
third quarter, yeah, so
But
that
your
was.
floor.
4
is
more.
a lot of-
4 more halfway through the second semester. So, you know, if we were aiming for 4 in the semester and we were halfway through and we had 4, we felt like that was, you know, a pretty good, that we were on our way in terms of adding more assessments.
And then what about, do you have a floor then for the different types of assessments?
We said multiple forms of assessment this semester. Yeah, that's what we were going for, but we hope we hope to get in position where it's more than 2, quite honestly. We have several of our departments and courses that employed more than 3 or 4 methods of assessment. We know that, you know, in math in particular, it was really primarily quizzes and tests. We had a couple of our courses that had some projects as part of their summative assessments as well. But that was our floor, was multiple forms. And for 1 or 2 areas, quizzes and tests were those methods. We hope to expand upon that, and we know that we need some more learning and development in that area.
Would that be something then that,
I would add on to that too. So from all the different types of assessment that Dr. Trell just mentioned that they saw in the grade book, those have existed in schools for forever. So one of the things that there was a total unintended consequence is, as we talked about doing retakes, teachers stopped counting certain things that they'd done before. They didn't count them as summative, as a lab, for example, because how can you redo a lab? That's why we added that piece of, well, if it's something you've given feedback on along the way, you can totally count that as a summative. We're not telling you to stop teaching and just create giant tests. That was never an intention. That was an unintended consequence when teachers first started looking at some of the changes. So to see those come back and to show up in that gradebook audit says, oh, this is school. This is what school looks like. This is what teachers do. So in that sense, we were pretty pleased with seeing how some of those things were coming back. So,
I think we've talked about like where there needs to be a variety.
right, absolutely,
Because everybody learns differently and there's different ways
Right.
to do that. So that's a goal that you're,
absolutely, yeah.
and you saw a positive with that.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay.
lot of learned assessment in the book. Great books.
Ready to move on?
Go ahead. That was quite a pause.
All right, but just want to make sure, I do have two members of the grading implementation team with us here tonight, Matt Ranft and Andrew Johannes, and they're going to help share some information as well. As you guys know, we've had this grading implementation team for quite a while, since 2017, 2018. And we've been reviewing things all along. This was the team that when we realized we needed to look at some things this fall, we got this team together again and really looked at suggested those changes for second semester. We continued to meet throughout all of second semester. And in so doing, we kept hearing three major themes. One was that how do we incentivize homework? Students aren't doing it, or they don't think it's important, or because they don't get points for it, they're having a hard time doing it, and trying to define what exactly is homework. Is homework a quiz? Is homework a worksheet? Is homework work that you do prior to class? Is it reading a book? All those kinds of things we needed to work on. How do you incentivize those things? We also looked at how do we minimize revisions and retakes, especially for those who choose not to turn things in on time, right? We're hearing over and over again, how are we teaching students responsibility when they say, well, I don't have to turn it in on time, I won't get any points off, and then I have more time, and I can revise it, and then I can get the feedback. Well, we were finding, and teachers and students were finding, it was taking 4 to 5 weeks to go through that cycle, right? So that's certainly not an intention there. So how do we minimize that? And we have been playing around, well, not even playing around, we've been trying to understand the best way to go about final exams and final summatives. If you recall, first semester, we had no final exam periods, and teachers were giving retake time. Some were giving common cumulative finals and allowing retakes, some weren't. We heard loud and clear people wanted final exam periods back. And then when we got to the final exam periods this year, people were like, well, we don't have anything to do during the final exam period. And so we're just allowing retakes. And so that's something that we're still working toward figuring out, right? Some of our courses don't offer finals, have never offered finals, don't have cumulatives, others do. So how do we sort of navigate that? So that really led to the three recommendations that we have here. And definitely wanted Matt and Andrew to have an opportunity to sort of share, especially from the teacher's perspective, because a lot of these suggestions came from those teachers. It was, you know, we really need to figure out how to solve these three problems because these are things that we're running into on a daily basis, right? So do you guys want to add anything to that?
So the 10%, we talked about that, where formative is going to now count for 10% of the grade, and that can only help the student. I think that is a fair compromise that the teachers and the administration came to with the grading implementation team. As long as there's feedback, I think that's a fair compromise. Scott also mentioned the final exam period. I think we've cleaned up some language that clarifies what teachers can do with that. And so I think some of the teachers this year felt a little maybe stifled, maybe not fully understanding how to implement and just reading it to the T and not having some flexibility there. So I think this language clears that up. And then I also think the language clears up about having due dates. A lot of teachers were upset about, you know, we'll have a speaking presentation, I'm giving students time in class, and then the time of the presentation they say they're just not ready. And so a lot of teachers were very frustrated with that because they are giving them time to complete work in class and it just isn't happening because a student could then turn it in late. So now that deadline is a hard deadline, and if they aren't ready, then that would go in as a missing. They can still retake it, but that would be their only submission. So I think that is bringing back some accountability, which I think both parents and teachers were calling for.
And one of the things in math is the homework. You know, the homework is important. We never said that it wasn't important. But just a completion grade on the homework, you know, in the past could be 20% of their overall grade of just, you know, just completion of the homework right there. So one of the points of clarification is that there has to be feedback on the homework or on the formative assessment. So the homework wouldn't just be, say, a homework completion grade. It would be a homework check right there. So the teacher would give the homework, the teacher would check the homework, with the students ask for feedback from the homework, and then once that's all completed, then the teacher could give, say, a homework check of what was already given feedback on, and then the student would hand that in for a grade.
I think a lot of what you're hearing are unintended consequences that we're trying to unravel, right? That the plan was never to say, you know what, just show up, take a test, see how you do, right? We know practice is important. Even with our athletic teams, there's practices. Obviously, you don't get any points in the game for having practice, but you know that practice is important to the overall outcome. And we agree with that 100% as well. One of the things that we do want to make sure, though, is that students aren't in the position of feeling they have to be perfect from the start. And that's really what led to a lot of our thinking on formatives, is we want students to be able to struggle. We want students to try something, get some feedback, and still have an opportunity to demonstrate that learning. And we think that these changes are definitely leading in that direction. You know, when you look in particular, and Matt mentioned with the formatives, it is important that they're getting feedback. And when we did our original research in 2016, we found that half of our teachers were not giving homework. And then of those that were giving homework, half of them were just checking to see if it was done or not. So the 3/4 of our homework, if it was even given in classes, kids weren't getting any feedback. Others were then counting it for a grade, and it was points right away. So if you missed it, if you didn't do it, if you didn't understand it, you lost all those points. Our goal, and then looking at this model through the different research, was the more we can give students the feedback they need, they would be prepared to demonstrate their learning on the summative assessments. The more opportunities we give them to practice, the more opportunities we give them to feedback, the better, and then they'll do better on the summatives. What ended up happening, though, as we've heard, is that kids were not doing the formatives and just rolling the dice on the summatives and then going for a retake. When, you know, in listening to students too, we're seeing a couple of interesting things. Our students at North, and maybe it was because of the pandemic, maybe it was because of the shifts there, had a harder time with that shift to the formatives and summatives. Many of our students at South Campus saw this as something they had done previously. As we've talked about previously, some of our associate schools have had a similar model where only summatives counted, or where they were looking at standards-based grading or those kinds of things. So we've seen from the students, especially freshman and sophomore year, more students see how this works in their own process. So again, that's encouraging, and the more that we can incentivize students from the start to take that homework seriously, to get the feedback that they need, the more that we see it moving into multiple assessments now, multiple ways of demonstrating their learning, and still having the opportunity to retake and show additional learning. The caveat there being that if you don't do the work originally, that when you turn it in, that's basically your retake. You don't get to do it again and again. Especially with papers, our English teachers were expressing concern because they did a draft, they got feedback, they did a second draft, they added quotes, and then the due date came and the paper didn't come in. And then when the paper did come in about a week later, by the time they graded it and got it back to them, then they wanted a 2-week window for the revision. So we were looking at 4 to 5 weeks for one paper to go through this process. And again, that's not the spirit of this. So now when it's due, We're not taking points off if it's late, but you don't get a chance to keep doing it and redoing it and redoing it. So I think we've struck a balance here, but, to your point, Don, how do we measure these outcomes? We made these changes again before looking at the impact of first semester, the changes into the second semester, because we still need to take a look at final grade data. The good thing about this 10%, 90%, we can see how many kids took that 10% as to support their grade and how many didn't. So we'll be able to know how many are using this formative percentage to help their grade or how many of it didn't. So we'll know, we'll have more of that information. We won't have that information though before the start of second semester, right? So these are definitely lagging indicators. It's harder to kind of see the leading indicator for some of these because it does come down to that specific grade. But that being said, the implementation team has had a tremendous amount of conversation about how do we make this work in the spirit of the goal, which is to give students every opportunity to have a grade that measures what they have learned, not behaviors, not punishment for turning in things late, those kinds of things. We want the grade to be a pure grade that measures what has been learned with the feedback along the way so that they can demonstrate that learning, right? And obviously there's going to be a time, the semester ends, the grade is done. There is a deadline, there's a hard deadline there. But more than anything, we want our grades to measure what that student knows. And we put a lot of work and effort into saying this is what a student should learn in this class. We want them to demonstrate it. We want them to all demonstrate it when they can. So I think we're in the right direction, and certainly coming out of pandemic and hybrid, and there were a lot of adjustments that teachers made, and they've definitely explained their concerns. And again, by expanding our team, getting more teachers on from more areas, teachers who teach what we call singletons, right? Those are the teachers who teach 5 different classes a day who aren't on any teams. Those types of people are really helpful too, because they get a better sense of how things go, different perhaps from a teacher who teaches 2 different types of classes a day. So I don't know if you guys wanted to add anything else either. It's really been helpful getting that teacher perspective and working through.
Yeah, to Scott's point, I think expanding the team will allow us to kind of address specific concerns like art and math might be having, that we can then talk to that and work through that as a group. Right now we have a member from each division, but expanding that out I think is going to be helpful and clarifying some of the questions that teachers will have.
I just want to say one other thing about the feedback loop, and this ties to the Canvas Infinite Campus. There's something in math called Delta Math, and it's a really powerful program. And should the kid do his homework and there's 10 questions assigned on Delta Math and they get it incorrect, I mean, they get immediate feedback right then and there. And then they can either choose to redo the problem, they can choose to look at a video, they can choose to maybe wait till tomorrow, right, to get help that way. But there's immediate feedback right there for the student, and then the teacher is also allowed to do a cross-section on, say, a certain topic or problem and look at how many kids are getting this. Is it just one kid that needs it, or maybe I need to go back and reteach this topic to the whole class. So, but again, it's being done in Delta Math, and then can we get Delta Math to upload it, or does the teacher have to go into now yet another thing and then upload that to Infinite Campus to actually see that this is actually being documented and done? So I just wanted to share that.
Is Delta Math available for multiple math courses, or?
Oh yeah, it's not the end all be all for everything, but we kind of started using it really heavily when the pandemic was thrusted upon us, and it's really nice program that this guy started using, and then we've expanded it through a lot of programs.
Well, since I jumped ahead with my question, and I apologize, I'm kind of running on fumes tonight. Thank you for all the elaboration. I'm encouraged about these changes. As much as I love data and love to kind of always think about, hard data ways that we can we can understand how we can measure success of things. That's not always possible. A lot of what we learned during the course of the year was from the anecdotal feedback from teachers, students, and parents. So I'm hopeful that we will continue, well, I know with the grading implementation team, that's one vehicle to continue that. There's something in when we've talked about the grading along the way of the course of the year, one of the things I said, like, is understanding where the pressure points are, right? And I think that's been the work of the team as you've reviewed the unintended consequences or the unintended impacts. We've uncovered some of those pressure points. There's still something I feel in the whole retake policy. And I only say that because I completely agree with you that from the standpoint of a student showing mastery in a material, you could have a really off day because you've got somebody sick in your family. You were at a gymnastics meet last night or a TAB event, and you're not going to perform on that one point in time test as well as you could have if that test was another time. So philosophically, I completely understand, or something just doesn't click earlier in a class in math. You teach a concept, but you get 2 units further, and all of a sudden a light bulb goes on, and now if I could go back to that, I get it now, but I needed that additional material. So I understand it. However, the unintended consequences and impacts of the way the students have worked the system has caused all these additional retakes, a lot of additional stress. And I don't know how we get at that, but again, I think I said this when I was jumping ahead, the idea should be, and I know what you're after, is to get students to engage in the learning process, deeply engage in all the important points along the way so that when they take the test, that they've engaged, they're showing what they've learned, it's accurate. Is there value in managing the amount of retakes? I know just personally, and my daughter, I had some of her teachers that would log the retakes so I could see, and it's, all of us having high schoolers, it's not the easiest, parental trick to get accurate information from your teenager, So, but is there some value in looking at retakes and understanding that, even if it's anecdotally, what's happening, and are we still getting kids that are just really not engaging along the way so that they're cramming? Because I know that we all would agree that the value of cramming and learning over time is not going to be as valuable.
Yeah, and we've had lengthy conversations along those lines. There's no way to create a system where a kid isn't going to try to find what the advantage is for their personal experience, right? One of the reasons why we made changes to our grading practices is because of inconsistency. So prior to 2017, we had teachers like, if Ed and I were on the same teaching team, he allowed retakes and I didn't. The kids were saying, well, that's not fair, I should get a retake, right? And we agreed, we're like, yeah, that isn't fair, it should be consistent, it should be fair. Yeah. The question certainly is in, how many should you be able to do? That being said, it's also hard to say, you know what, again, not everyone should have the opportunity to demonstrate the learning that they've learned, right? And I know I took tests as a student. I understood something better after the next unit, but that low grade was there and I couldn't do anything about it. Our kids are intensely concerned about their grades. And to then say, you have to pick and choose when you're going to do a retake. Anecdotally, we're hearing there are a lot of retakes of A tests, right? We had a long debate. Do we not allow a kid who gets an A retake an A test? Well, if it's a low A and they can get a higher A, but if they would have done poorer and got a B, they could have gotten a higher. When you try to play the game through you really go down a lot of rabbit holes. And that becomes a challenge, right? So then it's what if you choose not to retake that first test and that was actually the one you could have or should have, but you didn't, but you only get 2, and so now we're not talking about learning or demonstrating additional learning, we're creating new rules to a game. And the more that we've gone down this road and thought about it, we just want to make sure that we start building the right habits so that the students who enter see how it works and begin to follow the intended direction, rather than, trying to figure out the angles. That being said, kids have been absent on tests time immemorial, thinking they'll have a little more time, or they'll have a chance to see it after someone else takes it, or hear from their friend who took it, or the kids who had it first hour, wishing they had the class 8th hour, and the 8th hour kids asking, all those things have happened always. I mean, we're not going to get completely out of that. But when you start to limit, now you're wondering, well, where does that limit end? And ultimately, you want students to demonstrate their learning. What did they learn? And we're teaching a lot of amazing stuff. And if the whole point is to make sure kids don't learn all of it so that we have a nice grade distribution, well, I don't think that's our job either. We want the kids to learn as much as they can, and we want to give them as much as we can, and we want them to, as many of them, demonstrate as much of that learning as possible. So that's why we're spending the time in this gray area, because we want to make sure that the grade represents, again, if we're taking all those behaviors out and the grade is represent what you've been able to show that you've learned, that's really important. That's sort of always been our North Star with this.
Yeah, and I understand and agree with all that. I think you hit it on the head a little bit when you said, part of it is work habits, right? And we just went through the strategic plan, and if we are preparing kids for life, career, and college readiness, that's, this conversation fits squarely into that, and we know that 80% of our kids go to college, and to develop the understanding of how to be a good student here, and what are good student habits, and what are good learning habits, and if I have to, chase down the teacher to get feedback. Those are all things that are so important before they hit their next steps, whether they're college or not, because that is life. And it does worry me that in college we don't see retakes. We do see, having 2 college students and having talked with a plethora of college students, we do see grades for participation, for quizzes, for tests along the way. And we do see final exams. So I'm still trying to square up all of that. And I know you all are too. And, just want to make sure that, that the changes that are put into effect are helping in those directions. Because for me, it's not the kids that are getting into this cycle of retakes to improve their A. It's the kids that are not taking the learning seriously, not engaging in learning along the way, doing poorly on the test, and then having to cram and maybe being successful at pulling off a good grade or not, but at that point, we've missed the learning window opportunity. So if there are ways to gather feedback prior to the end of second semester through the grading implementation team, through students, through parents, through teachers, I think that would be important, knowing that this is not going to be all, hard and fast numbers that are going to tell the full story.
Right.
And other than that, thank you for continuing to look at that and continuing to pursue some different avenues to embark on that still helps us to accomplish the goals and to helps us minimize the unintended impacts.
All right, so I think that just to add to the final exam discussion, I really do think that we are not preparing the students for real life and college life when we have where they may administer it or administer it, the final exam 2 weeks beforehand, and then just use it as a retake, because it's not real life scenario that students are going to be retaking final exams in college. And so when they leave here, this is what we should be preparing them for. So I find it hard for us to, really be behind that fact, because especially when you had data and you had instances where a huge number of students just didn't show up for final exams this semester because they felt that it was no need to, that just does not send a good, rigorous learning experience that we're to be providing here.
Right. No, and did you want to say something? We've talked a lot about final exams, and prior to making any changes, we had a practice of you could exempt a final. You could just not take a final.
Right.
Overwhelmingly, the one they didn't take was math, followed by science. And those are our 2 cumulative finals. So many students weren't taking those anyway. And so that's always been a concern. We also have many courses that don't have finals at all. We have many courses whose finals had been final projects, which they're still doing. So we are trying to see where that cumulative final fits in. A lot of the teachers who've done those cumulative finals are also trying to see where that fits in as well. So, and I don't know, Matt, if you wanted to add anything. I know you guys have talked a lot about that in the math and the science area. But it was very common for teachers in that area when we had the exemptions to have 4 or 5 kids in the classroom. So we had a lot of absences prior, nothing like what we saw this year. But that was our concern too, of having a final exam period, because teachers could still do work when we didn't have a dedicated period and kids were there all day. That didn't work out so well. But I don't know, you don't have to answer if you don't want to.
Oh, but we did do, I also teach AP Physics, and we did do a cumulative, we called it a comprehensive test right before, say, the AP exam. So maybe, I can't give you an exact number, but maybe a week and a half before the actual AP exam, we gave a comprehensive test, and that comprehensive test was going to help them towards, studying better for the actual AP exam. And then we offered that same comprehensive test again during finals week right there, just so that they would have a chance, if they weren't ready for the AP exam at that week and a half before the AP exam, they had another chance to go and retake that test at that later date right there.
No,
I
I was just going to ask a clarification on the exemptions, because I didn't have kids here before the new grading policy. I mean, but isn't that usually when a student has earned an A for the semester? It's not. So what would constitute an exemption in one of those classes?
It started by not having behavioral infractions, and then and tardies, and it sort of devolved into almost anyone got one that needed one.
Eventually, it was difficult to not have the exemption.
Right.
We probably had 80% of our kids that had an exemption.
So, but it wasn't tied to an A, because that's a motivation.
No.
Right. No, they could,
do
and they could
everything
use it
else.
for any course they wanted.
It was a C- or
A lot of
better.
like calculations happening at the end of the semester, like what do I need this exemption for? And then they wouldn't take the final exam.
That's true.
And it was
Yeah.
the logistical piece to the AP office. They would print exemption forms, they would deliver them like the day before finals, and then the student would come into the teacher's classroom and say, here's my exemption, I'll take the final.
And teachers had to have all their grades completed the Friday before finals so that the students could pick what they were going to exempt.
Because they could only do one.
And I thought that was, like absences used to be tied to it, but then they took that off there, that they couldn't tie. Like you had to have, if you had more than, I'm going to make up a number, 3 absences, you were barred from the exemption. And then that was determined as not.
Yeah, and Matt, correct me on this one, but if I remember this correctly, the whole rationale for no harm finals started with exemptions, because we had a teacher who wanted students to get that experience of the final exam, and the only way that they could have that carrot to do the final exam and not use the exemption was to make it no harm. So they encourage students to come in, take the final, don't use your exemption in this class, but it will not be harm, it'll be no harm. And so that whole exemption thing led to no harm finals. It also probably had a lot to do with retakes as well.
When you guys talk about the expanding of the team, expanding the grades, the grading team, how many teachers are we going to have on that team now?
That's a good question. We haven't determined that specifically. I mean, we could go by department, we could go, but some of our departments are much larger, right? So like if you have global studies, you have 4 departments. Do we have 4 people from global studies and only 2 from math science? So we're going to try to figure as a team what makes the most sense. We want to make sure that we have people who are providing perspective, not just a balance of power, so to speak. We want to make sure that people, I am more of a performance-oriented course. You don't have my voice here. Or, I'm more South Campus and core instructional, North Campus elective instructional. So we want to make sure we have a good balance. you know, when we started, we had one from each division, and we've sort of added a couple here and there. We also need to make sure that we're meeting when everyone can make it, so we have some members who are head coaches, right, which is good to have their perspective, but when they're in season, they can't make any meetings, so are we going to have alternates? You know, those are all things we want to work to clarify at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I love the idea of expanding. I would just, you know, I think the more the merrier as far as, I know it's harder to get stuff done, but there's so much more perspective.
Right.
Value.
Well, again, like you've mentioned tonight, this is very qualitative. There are a lot of feedback from people, from what teachers are seeing and feeling, from what we hear from parents, from what we hear from students, you know, from what we see when we look at grade books. These are all, you know, we want to make sure that we're getting what we really want to get. And so, you know, the more people that can share that in those meetings, the better.
What, are we at all worried about that formative grading of adding that 10% and then giving the option? Is that a huge chunk more work for the teachers? Are we worried about that, or?
We're trying to find a technological solution. I mean, essentially, if you just visualize it, when you go in the grade book, you have a summative grade and a formative, right? And the formative doesn't count. So next year, you'll have a summative grade and a formative grade. The summative that's there, that's the grade you have if you don't take the homework, the 10%. Then there's also an estimated calculated grade that would include it. So you should be able to discern the two based on summative only and the estimated grade. That may not be automated though at the end, so we'll have to, you know, ideally we would automatically pick the better of the two, but we're going to have to see. We don't want it to be teacher intensive to have to do all that. But that being said, it wouldn't hurt to have some oversight. Those are some tech-oriented things that we started talking about. You know, we didn't really finalize this option until well into May, and so we want to make sure that we can make it so that it picks it the right way, you know. So, but it definitely shouldn't be too difficult to see, as long as, again, we're getting that info from Canvas over into Infinite Campus for those that are grading. So we've got some work to do this summer to get those pieces together. But that being said, that 10%, it should be pretty easy for people to know where they stand. Andrew,
Just to clarify, like I talked with the tech coaches, to Scott's point. If you recall, the old grade book used to be like coursework and then the final grade, and then you would have the semester grade. So basically it would be something like that, where you'd have the summative, the formative, and then the final grade. And so then we would take the two of the higher grades. So it would probably most likely be an override by the teacher of taking the higher grade.
So that was one of the questions I had coming in tonight, and maybe the previous conversation about what you found in the grade book audit informs this, but just where did the 10% come from, especially in light of the peer institutions that were presented last time? That's still, you know, still a bit of an outlier from all of our other schools that we looked at. So I was just wondering, and you mentioned compromise, so I was just curious how you landed on 10%.
We had many conversations about that one.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You know, I think ultimately we wanted it to be something that would make a difference, and we had, prior to making things consistent, that was a very common number. It was 10%. Some had 20, some had 10. We felt that it was enough of an incentive. I mean, if you don't do it, well, then your grade goes down a whole grade, right? So if you add it in, if you choose not to take it, then it wouldn't. So we felt that was there, and I don't know if you guys have any other recollections of 10.
I think it was just kind of an even number. I think there was kind of going back and forth, but we felt that it's enough to add incentive. I actually did a couple gradebook pulls from members of the exec board of the LTA, and I calculated how it would change the grade about 2 to 3% for every student, roughly on average. Some was a little bit higher or more. Now, that grade data is complete in the sense that students were completing formative, not knowing that it's counted as a grade part of their grade. So I would only see this having a positive impact on students. And so I think it's just enough to give that amount, but we also want to put the amount of work that kids are doing and demonstrating their learning through the summative process.
And the majority of those formatives are still required to qualify for any kind of retake or revision. So there's sort of a double incentive, right?
That stays in place. Okay, that kind of leads to my next question. I just wanted to clarify, because it wasn't clear before I came in, but I think I'm there after the conversation. There's a deadline for your work to be turned in, but then there's still an extension for your work to be turned in. But the key there is you don't get that second chance.
Correct.
And then what happens past that 2-week window? Then it's a 0, or however it works in that course.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, if it's never turned in, they don't get credit.
Yeah. Well,
No, there are schools that will.
goes on and on.
Yeah,
That's
definitely.
why I'm asking.
I would just say that during these last 2 years, teachers have had to be very flexible, and we had to accommodate a lot of different things because of the pandemic. And so we went back to kind of a regular schedule, and then we're also still kind of in the pandemic. So that created a lot of instability in the system, and I think that made kind of people feel kind of uncertain of where to go. I think having a fresh start next year and kind of resetting the expectations, I think will help a lot of our uncertainty that we're experiencing for teachers, students, and parents.
Have you had a chance to get some feedback from the other teachers about where we've landed going into next year?
Very little. It was like the grading implementation, we were going back and forth because it was pretty late in the year, and the communication unfortunately had to go out just later. For the most part, it seems positive, just more for clarification. So I think one thing that we should really focus on is starting in August is like kind of reinstituting and re-implementing what we are saying, what kind of reiterating why these changes were made and how we think this will positively impact the students.
One concern about that, the finals, it was when I was reading through the final schedule and having the ability to do the final, whether it was 2 weeks or 5 days or whatever, before it is, now all of a sudden, if we do a final, it's now earlier in the year or earlier in the semester. I'm a little concerned about this final schedule because it brings it earlier, and then it's like, well, why do we actually have the final schedule back at the end of the year? And it seems real confusing for me, and it also, it goes back to, I think what Dawn and Michael had said is, college is going to have finals. I mean, they have finals. They have a set day for that, and it just makes me uncomfortable that now we're going to be doing finals, but it'll be 5 days earlier, and then maybe we'll be able to retake, or, the confusion there.
And to add also, if you go back to the scheduling too, when we look at the schedule of the school year, we went through many discussions about like the number of when we start, because it depended on also to giving the teachers enough time for content in the class. So if you're ending classes like 2 weeks earlier, then the teachers have to adjust their overall schedule now and the content in the course.
And just one more add to that, we're reducing instruction time as well, which is a concern of mine.
Yeah, for those courses that choose to do a cumulative final, again, as we got to this piece, there is more work that still needs to be done to clarify some components. Like I said, we have many courses that don't have a cumulative final, or that have a project, or that have a component of a summative that's been many pieces put together. That's always been a problem with a final exam schedule. When I taught English, we had a final paper, and when that paper was turned in, the final exam was enrichment. We didn't do a final, right? Colleges don't have, colleges have you turn in a paper as a final as well. So we're trying to find that balance from those cumulative courses and those that don't do that, right? Our art classes where it's a portfolio of work. We have some teams that at that final exam period have everyone share their work and give feedback on the work, which is great. We also, in the past, have had people showing movies on final exam day. It's 110 minutes, and they didn't have a cumulative final. So PE was always a problem because they didn't give a final exam during that time period, but they had a long time to sit there in a gym. So we've always had a challenge with how our final few days work. One of the reasons why we went away from a final exam schedule first semester last year was to have more instructional time. So again, we're trying to strike that balance. One of the things that we found also from first semester, we did have teams that gave a cumulative assessment on the very last day before winter break. And the students felt betrayed because they had an opportunity to retake things up until that point, and then they took that test. We had many parent complaints about that. So again, a lot of things to balance, and we want to make sure, again, that the students have the opportunity to demonstrate the most amount of learning they can. And again, you know, there are college courses that have final exams that are cumulative and in nature. We also have them that it's just a paper, or you have a midterm and a paper, that sort of thing. So again, we're trying to strike that balance. You're not going to have a cumulative final for a kid who's an art major. So we just want to make sure we're providing the time in the best way possible. And it didn't work as well as we wanted first semester. It worked even worse second semester. So we want to take the time to make sure we get it right going into this next semester.
Scott, when would we know more about that, what the details are going to look like for the final exam schedule? And as we're talking about
Sure.
these very important issues, when can we hear more about that?
Well, when we all get back together as a team in the fall, so.
Have to be an important topic of the grading implementation team moving
Exactly.
forward, is that end of semester
September.
schedule, the final exams.
I mean, we're going to have to really grapple with that in September.
We made the adjustments for next semester, or we made the adjustments for the upcoming school year, but this has to be an ongoing topic.
Yeah,
of discussion.
We won't have anything to share with the board in September because that deadline would be the first day we get, first week of September. But we would be working through that in September to clarify that, right?
Again, it's a continuous, continually striving to make sure that we're balancing the needs. We're also putting guardrails on things without mandating things for every single teacher, every single teacher team, and striking that balance. I mean, I think that's a really good point to make, right? Like if we feel like final exams are traditional cumulative finals are critical, and we said every teacher will give a traditional cumulative final, that would be the first time that LT ever did that. We know that. We know the data on that. So I think it's really important that the grading implementation team continue to look at the end of semester and final exam schedule and get to a good place with who's giving them when and
well, it's
with
critical
qualifiers.
for the teachers and for the students and the parents to understand what that is going to look like for the fall, like sooner than later.
And I really appreciate that what you just said, Brian, because it shouldn't be a one-size approach fits all for every course. We have such a diverse, broad depth of classes here, and it's going to look different. But so in order to give the flexibility to your course teams, or not even divisions, right? Course teams probably to have them deliver the experience that makes sense for that course. I would imagine that is going to look very different as it has in prior years at LT. So I appreciate that you're looking at that.
We've all gotten a lot of emails, as we all have seen. We've had countless discussions. I mean, I go to the park, I go to the tennis courts, I go to the grocery store. We hear a lot. And I would love, I think the thought is that the more we can make sure that people are heard. So I'm wondering if we can kind of commit to a survey, an open-ended survey, for the teachers, the students, and the parents to hear how it's going. I think that would be really helpful. I don't know how early in the semester we can do that so that we can see what's happening, but I would love to commit something like that.
Well, we did a survey
last year, so maybe there will be a follow-up.
Yeah, so
Part of
we have the
strategic
data from the strategic plan survey, which
Yeah.
included grading questions. I think that's a interesting point, Allison, because our strategy within the strategic plan, which is strategy 3, goal 1, is very specific that we want to honor voice, but also use educational research. And we have to balance those two things. So I think moving forward, we will continue to look at the research and we'll also be responsive to feedback. I mean, the changes that were made at the end of the first semester were responsive to feedback. The changes that are made now for next year is also responsive to feedback. And so we'll continue to do that. We'll also be creative with how we get that feedback.
Yeah, because I think that's the key, right, is how we get the feedback of, you know, we need to ask, we need to get, you know, all the different stakeholders there, you know, the teachers, the parents, and the students, because I think all three of them have different perspectives, and
Yeah, and I think, you know, that, to that point also, continuing to communicate this and communicate updates is really important, and also we can never lose sight of the why and the history here. Every single change that's been made around grading practices at LT have been present in our classrooms here for at least 10 years, maybe more. They just weren't applied consistently. And so when we traveled down this road in 2016, 2017, it was for that reason. It was to make it more consistent and make sure that students had the same experience. So, and also to look at other schools and to look at research and make sure that we're evolving our grading practices. And so that's, we will continue to reiterate that why and make sure that we keep that at the forefront and look at research and continue to evolve it.
All right. It is keeping a little bit of time, 9:30. We still have a lot more to cover, so.
I had a question that I wanted to ask. Sure. I haven't had a chance to chime in. So when you're looking at points of clarification, in bullet point number 2, that if a student fails to turn in a summative assignment on the date it is due without a valid excuse, I guess my concern is when we're looking at the purpose of the grading change, like piggybacking on what you were saying, Brian, about the why, what is a valid excuse? Because that can vary from teacher to teacher. Will there be some parameters around what is a valid excuse? Because if we're looking at equity between the classes and the teachers and consistency, one kid could say to a teacher, well, my dog ate my homework. And another one could say, you know what, my mom was in the hospital last night and I had to take her. So what parameters will be set around that?
That really gets into teacher autonomy to some degree. I mean, if a student's not here, you know, we're not going to go make sure they were really sick at home in bed. If the parent calls them in, says they're sick, they're sick. If a student comes in and says the dog ate their homework, and this is the 9th time the dog ate the homework, and you know, we're talking more about a summative though, rather than a formative. So this is a big thing. This is something we've been talking about for a while. What we've been seeing this year is, for example, with that big essay that was due, the teacher saying, okay, everybody turn in your essays, and 5 essays come forward. And there isn't a dog ate my homework. It's like, well, deadlines don't mean anything, so I'm going to take another week, right? That's what we're getting at. So if there's a valid excuse, if there's a reason, and again, this is to some degree what Andrew was talking about. Coming out of COVID, we did have people who were coming back from being sick or couldn't come for different, so there is a fine line there, and that's, you know, time immemorial, the teacher has been the one to decide if there really was a dog and if there really was homework eaten.
But I
But this
worry,
is on
though,
a
about-
big project.
Right, and I worry about the inconsistency between the classes, that we're putting autonomy in there with this. And that's what the whole reason of why we were doing this was to take away some of that.
Right. I mean, we have 3 options, right? No, you can't, anybody can, or a judgment has to be made. And
what if they don't agree with that judgment? Like, because you have one teacher.
I think that's the $1 million answer there, right? So we're very fortunate that we have flexible, understanding, and compassionate teachers. In every situation, they're going to support the student, right? And so, but if we come across situations where someone feels like they deserved an extension or they were wrong, then we also have a process in place where we can have other people review that. And
So there will be a
yeah.
process there to make sure.
That happens at the end of any semester or throughout semesters now, right?
Okay.
where someone might disagree with an extension of a deadline or something that happened with a classroom or teacher, and there's ways to get a review done on that. But thankfully, those are rare.
Hopefully they'll
those are
be
rare-
very rare, but
those
I
are
just want to
rare
make sure we're not
circumstances.
taking away
Yeah.
that
Right.
equity
No,
aspect
no.
of it, that there is a point where they could go and appeal that, if you
Right,
will.
right.
Okay.
That
thank you.
happens.
I had no idea. Thanks.
And thanks, Andrew and Matt, too, for speaking tonight. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to stick with curriculum.
All right.
The next item is the District 204 Consolidated District Plan.
All right, so you have in front of you a lot of information about what we do here at LT for many different groups. And ultimately, the reason why you're seeing this is in order to qualify for our federal grants, Title I, Title II, Title IV, ESSA, IDEA, we need to essentially tell the State Board of Ed that we have plans and goals and that we're working toward those plans and goals. So one of the reasons why this is here tonight as a first read, or, we're not approving it tonight, it's a committee meeting, is because it includes a lot from the strategic plan. So you guys approved the strategic plan tonight. So everything that's in here with those goals and outcomes aligns to what we say we do. There are also a number of components that have to be involved in this, and you'll see on page 42, multiple teams were involved in preparing the details. Just about every administrator on the dais here today and others were involved in putting this together. So at-risk students was led by Jennifer Terrell and Jen Rowe. The IDEA funding with Leslie Owens, Melissa Moore, and Brian Stashak. Our low-performing EL immigrant and library supports. Chair-oriented with Terrell Smith, Karen Rayno, and our entire division leadership team, especially for the low-performing students. In the area of a safe and healthy learning environment, that's really the building leadership team. And then the Title I and staff development, that was myself and Katie Smith, in particular on how do we support teachers to address all these issues. So getting that input, that information, and also using that strategic plan. All those people that you saw listed in the strategic planning process, we're counting for this plan development as well, because that's what that's all about. So how do we meet the needs of these unique students? There's also things that the state throws into this plan that you've probably never heard of, such as the foster care transportation plan. I would guess that the people on this dais are the only people who, and the two people mentioned as running the foster care plan, who even understand that that exists. But that is something that every school has to have in place, and we have to have a plan for that. And in order to make sure you do, they put it on as a tag to your grant funding. So again, it's a lot of information. Some of it comes from prior grants, especially those things that haven't changed under the strategic plan, like the foster care transportation plan. But you'll also notice that we've made a number of updates. And if you're really, when you got this packet and you were really wanting to read size 4 font, the second section of this is the actual state plan. And you'll notice that in each section it provides what was in the previous plan as well as what we've changed. So the expectation is not that you as a board member have to read 40 pages of type 4 font, but really what it is for us to explain to you today that we've reviewed this plan. This is not something, it is something we have to get approved each year, but it's not something we have to change each year. And so what tends to happen is, and the state says, as long as you're not making major changes, you can renew the plan without formal board action. We made major changes to the plan, so we need formal board action. But I think some of the things you heard earlier about what we're doing with our teams, with our strategic plan, are baked into this plan as well, in particular for these particular the outcomes for the different goals. We can go into each of these in detail, but ultimately you're going to be seeing the things that we've been doing this year such as working, we have culturally responsive pedagogy training next week with Goldie Muhammad. That's in here. That's something we're using title grant money for to bring her in. Our co-teaching initiative, which got kicked off this past week, or last week, that's in here. Our student voice circles with Trent Hall, that the principal has been working on with students, that's in here. You'll see more and more a lot of the nuts and bolts, the things we're actually doing, because we're using the grant to pay for these things. So we're paying for summer workshops with grants, we're paying for consultants, we're paying for after-school supports, we're buying school supplies for homeless kids. All that stuff is coming through these grants. So to get a real sense of what our grant money does for us, that's all in here as well. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know it's a ton of information, but ultimately it's something that our entire administrative team has taken a look at. It's something that is directly applied to, or directly aligned to our new strategic plan. And for almost all of these grants, the purpose is to support students who need extra support, and that's where this money's going. This is not being spent on frivolous items, it's being spent directly for students who need the most. And so that's ultimately what it is. I'd be happy to answer any questions or go into any further detail that you'd like to know. But other than that, I, again, realize that it's a lot, this is really sort of the work of operationalizing these big goals, especially to access federal funding.
I thought it was awesome. I really appreciated reading it. It was really impactful to be able to align those to the groundwork you guys had laid out in the strategic plan. It really kind of gelled for me when I was reading through it, so I really appreciate it. I think the only thing I was going to ask was, like you said, the last time it was approved was in 2020. Mm-hmm. And is this something that we post then on the website that's always up for people to see? I mean, I've applied for a grant, I've done some grant work too, so I find this to be really helpful, and it's really insightful to see how connected it is. I don't think I've ever seen the 2020.
It would have been presented to the board for approval, but I can't remember if it was done as consent agenda or not. I don't recall spending a whole lot of time talking about it. I do recall apologizing previously for the small font. That's how the state prints it. I wish it were otherwise. But everything that's above is essentially the meat and potatoes of the plan.
So it doesn't exist currently, like on the site in this form.
Right.
This is pretty helpful. I'd love to see
it will be submitted in the form that you see in the small font. The way that the grant is written, there are probably 30, 40 different tabs, all of which have to be approved. And there's also some other approvals that are in here that we can't do until we get the board approval, and then we just can check those boxes. So there's a lot of process involved with these grants, and sometimes who's reading the grant is a big deal, but they won't even let us apply for grants until we get this approved first.
Absolutely.
So, and if there's any issues, they'll tell us what they are, and if we need to come back to, we will. Usually not. They're assuming that your agreement is in totality, and if there's 2 or 3 things, like the first time we had to do the foster care transportation plan, it was rejected 3 times. We didn't keep coming back to the board to approve the foster care transportation plan. What do you want? Tell us how to do it. We're going to do it.
So it's really we hand this in for grant money, to get grant money. I was confused on, is it a plan, like, is it an operational plan that we should be, that we follow to the T, or I'm wondering.
So if we get audited, and everyone gets audited, so I should say when we get audited, they're going to come in and they might say, you said you worked with Trent Hall. Can we see the receipts from him and when he was here and who he worked with? So then we'll produce those things, right? So what they're looking is to make sure that the federal money is spent the way we said we intended to spend it. They're not measuring to see if it had an impact. They're not measuring to see if it changed anything. It's really on that grant side to make sure that you're spending the money the way you said you were going to spend the money.
It's a compliance step.
Right, the
It's a
compliance step.
with the state.
We do have to provide some grant reporting along the way. Once we do actually write the formal grant, that happens, it's going to be annually now. It was quarterly, and now it's going to be annually. But basically saying that we did, what we said we were going to do. You'll notice, you'll see that some of these things will become a part of our strategic plan process anyway, and some of our lagging indicators, as well as possibly some leading indicators, although most of the things here are to improve test scores or to provide extra support for kids, tutoring and the like. So that's all pieces that we're looking at as well. So there's no scorecard on this. There's no, hey, you said on this page that you were going to do X, Y, or Z. They'll want to see if we did, but they're not going to see if it made the impact that it should have.
Thank you.
And I just have one question, and it's more, I think, for you, Brian. How do we see all of these grant funds roll into our budget in terms of, like, I know we will see our grant revenues and so forth, but do we ever see them broken out into in terms of what we get for Title I, Title II, Title IV, IDEAS, and so forth?
Yes.
As line items?
Yes.
And then do we ever see the expenses under those line items for some of what would be in here?
So we track all of those grant expenses separately because we have to prove that, as Scott was saying, that, here's where we spent the money and related to these particular grants. You would not necessarily see the specific line items because, there's, 4,000 line items in our budget. And so you would not necessarily see those, but they are accounted for on a separate basis within our accounting system. And besides the fact that the state of Illinois comes in and audits the grants, we also go through an auditing process annually with our own financial auditors, and they typically will look at the grants as well. We have what's called a single audit. So essentially, if you have over more than $750,000 of federal money, then on an annual basis, then you have what's called a single audit. So they will look at that on an annual basis as well, and we absolutely have to track those dollars separately. But they aren't necessarily broken out on the form, the 5036 that you see, because that form really takes in and summarizes really all of those total dollars.
Okay, thank you.
We also have leeway to, like, if an opportunity arises or we see a need, we can amend our grant, we can make changes, we just have to explain why. So this isn't, that's why they don't make you redo this whole plan every year. This is the big picture of what we're trying to do. And if you have the chance to look at some of the previous words that were changed, you're going to see programs that don't exist anymore. Humanities was really popular and those types of things. So we're moving away from certain things, and so this is a significant enough of a change to warrant a full review by the board and approval. So that's why you're seeing it today and why it's so gosh darn long.
Thank you.
At some point, because I'm seeing a lot of cool stuff in here, like upstander campaigns and things like that, I think because of all we have to get through, but at some point, will we have a chance to learn a little bit more about these as they come together? Like the actual tactics that are in here?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll try.
I don't know. I mean, there's so much in there, right?
I mean, we probably won't report on every single thing. That being said, you'll hear from us when we, like a summer workshop, right? That would do that. You'll see the summer workshop reviews. You'll see, you'll see in one of Jen's newsletters that Trent Hall was here and worked with kids, and they did, so you'll see sort of the fruits of that labor coming out in what the kids are actually doing or what teachers are doing. It's just a question of how much reporting you would like, or how much reporting are we going to report all the time, or?
I just imagine,
It's a good
There's some
question.
good stuff in here. And I
Absolutely.
would like to lift up some good stuff. and I'd
Yeah,
like to
yeah.
hear about it at some
Absolutely,
point.
right.
So whatever
That's-
bubbles to
yeah.
the top, I'm sure we'll see along the way.
That's stuff that everybody probably would benefit from
Yeah.
the community. That'd be more
Yes.
information we'd want to be pushing back out, I think, on the website and newsletters and other ways to communicate. That's awesome, Joe.
Yeah, we've social emotional, we've got a lot of big things, and that funding really helps us, so.
Thank you.
All righty, thanks. And then the last agenda item under curriculum is the DAOES, which is the DuPage Area Occupational Education System Intergovernmental Agreement. That's a lot to say.
Yep. Otherwise known as DAOS. So DAOS is the governing system for TCD, or Technology Center of DuPage, which is the center that we send about 40-ish students a year to for a variety of VOC programs. They have construction and law enforcement and healthcare and cosmetology and IT, a lot of different programs. So DAOS is the governing system for TCD. The DAOS board is made up of the superintendents, who, me included, whose school district sends students to TCD. So in July of 2021, ISB and JCAR, Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, approved new rules for CTE, or Career and Technical Education, that essentially said that in order to be considered for continued approval as a regional consortium, which is what we are, that cooperative agreements that existed prior to 2021 must be updated by July of 2023. So over the last year, the DAOS board has spent time working with the DAOS board attorney, which is John Fester, to update our agreement. The DAOS board approved it in May, so we approved it as a board in, it was in May. Now the next step is we each take it back to our member districts and have the Board of Education for the member district approve the agreement as well. One of the significant changes was the updated language related to the dissolution. So if something happened with TCD and it went away and they had to sell all their assets, we updated the dissolution agreement to honor the school districts who were in it from the beginning versus the school districts who were added after the fact. We're one of the school districts that joined late. We joined in the late 80s. It actually started in the early to mid 70s, 72, 73, I think. So this is just a first reading, but essentially I'll try to keep that brief, but I think the packet and the agreement and the memo explain everything that we need. Essentially, I'd like to do a first reading this month, bring this back in August for a second reading, ask the board to approve the agreement, and then that would allow the DAOS board to make it official.
So
I
that's
tried to
good.
go through that quickly.
Yeah, okay. Think everyone's good? All right. Okay, we get to switch gears. DLA has been waiting over here. So our first item under facilities is actually an action item, and it's related to an emergency HVAC system repair. Ryan Suchat.
Thank you, President Dillon. So yes, this is not something that we typically do or ask the board for unless we absolutely have to. And in this particular situation, what we have is a condensate return line. So that's part of the steam system that helps to, not helps, but heats the North Campus main building here as we go through the winter months. And in May, we had discovered that we had a couple of steam line or condensate return line leaks. Unfortunately, this particular steam line, and we have at least, I think it's 2 leaks right now that we are aware of. And the piping that is currently there is really in some bad shape. And so what we're doing right now is we're going to have to replace this because we have no choice. The other issue with this is that this is certainly going to exceed our $50,000 non-bidding threshold. That being said, we don't have the time right now to go to a formal bid and have this repair completed because ultimately this particular line runs really the width of the building. So from the park side of the building on the west side all the way over to the Brainerd side on the east side of the building. And so this is going to involve multiple locations. And again, if we had to go to bid, the earliest we would even be able to bring back results at this particular point would be August or September. Right now, unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time. We have to get this taken care of and get it taken care of here really in the summer right now. And so We've had F.E. Moran working here at South Campus. They are taking a look at possibly repairing this for us and getting this done. And so really what we need to do tonight is just simply authorize essentially the use of the emergency provision to bypass the formal bidding process so that we can move forward with this repair. I think preliminary estimates, and Paul or Ed, you can maybe chime in on this. I think we're maybe $100,000, somewhere in that area. Is that accurate?
That's in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, that's in the ballpark. What we're having F.E. Moran do is they'll look at it on a time and material basis, so they won't overinflate the cost because there's a lot of unknowns here. So we're trying to do it in a way that'll keep it as close to the actual cost as possible.
Yeah, and I think what's really important to point out here is the location of this particular condensate return line, which is underneath all of the floor. And so it's something where we are going to have to tear up a good portion of the flooring down in the lower level here of the facility. And again, we have to get that done, and we have to get it done quickly.
So we could get it put back before students, we would get the floor back intact before students come to school in August.
That's the goal. That's why we're bringing it to you now, so we can accomplish that.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So is this something that, like, it only becomes on your radar when it starts to leak? It's one of those things that you just don't know the condition of because it's buried and...
That's right. Yeah, there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, we've had to use this provision one time, other times since I've been here, and we had an issue with a leak in the study hall here at North Campus, and an old plaster ceiling that was above the current drop ceiling started actually falling down, and so we actually had to use that provision at that point as well, because we did not have the time to go to a formal bid process when you have, that area of the facility really out of commission at that point.
I think to add a little color, I think to the condensate line itself and how you deal with it, we're in the process of converting all the equipment over to hot water systems. So eventually, once we finish all the equipment in this building, we don't need that anymore. But we have to rely on it now for the legacy equipment that's here. Generally, you do just repair it as it fails because most of it's buried. Generally, it's been buried in walls, a little bit easier to get to. This is one of the more extreme examples where it runs underneath the floor at the lowest level. There's only a few locations like that. Unfortunately, there's no way to know until it goes, and to replace it all ahead of time, it's like you're going to not need it eventually, and so do you want to invest the money to tear out floor and do it if you don't have to? So you kind of just wait and see has been the strategy. It's not a great strategy, unfortunately, but that's how we've combated it in the past.
I understand, thank you. That's
And
helpful.
F.E. Moran, I know, like, we were worried about they'd have enough people for all the HVAC stuff, and they have the...
They've committed. That's one of the reasons they asked us to let them know soon, because they've already put aside the team to do this. They have committed labor for it, and as soon as we tell them go, they're gonna go.
Great.
It also kind of layers into one of the other conversations we're going to have today about work that they're not going to do this summer, so they have some people that can move over from that work.
Okay. Yep. I think that sounds good. All right. If we don't have any further questions, can I have a motion then to approve emergency authorization for expenditure related to the HVAC system repair as presented?
So moved. Second.
I think we got Dylan and Dawn.
And then who seconded?
Dawn.
Dawn, okay.
And if you can please call the roll, Brian.
Member Beta Daniels?
Yes.
Member Gretsch?
Yes.
Member Kelly?
Yes.
Member Thomas?
Yes.
Member Albert?
Yes.
Member Dillon?
Yes. Thank you. Moving right along.
Thank
Take it
you.
away. Brian
All right.
Stachek.
Yeah, this is just a quick update on the board, and I believe Dr. Waterman has sent something home in an update as well regarding this particular situation. So, one of our projects for this coming summer was to replace the 9 air handling units here at the North Campus Field House. And again, those 9 air handling units, the existing ones currently heat the facility. The new ones will heat the facility and provide air conditioning to the facility. Unfortunately, well, let me take a step back. The project was supposed to start mid-May. May 16th, we were supposed to shut the field house down. Demo was supposed to begin. And then we were supposed to have the new air handling units installed and ready to go around, and the facility back in operational use mid-September. We were informed about 2.5, 3 weeks ago that the earliest the delivery of the new air handling units would be mid-October, late October. Again, this is one of the issues we're going to potentially could deal with for some extended period of time here, supply chain issues. And so ultimately, when we were told that, we said, well, what does that timeline look like? Well, the installation of those probably at that point is November, beginning of December, somewhere along those lines, and there's balancing and testing and all those additional items that have to be completed. And there was just no way that timeline is going to work, because if we had demoed and taken out the existing air handling units, we would have no heat in that facility. And so that's not something we can do at this particular point. So again, with the delay in the delivery of the new air handling units. So at this particular point, we have made the unfortunate and difficult decision to delay that project until next summer. At this point, we're still kind of preliminary. In terms of what that means, we do think it will add some cost. And the reason that is because first of all, we're going to have to store the units once they are delivered. There will be some storage involved in those. Labor contracts potentially could increase next year as well. And so they're again, we don't know what those costs are like or what we think they're going to be at. I know, Ed, you're working on that with F.E. Moran, and we'll have some more information for the board. But really, tonight's discussion is just so that you understand that, where we are, and we could not, and why we could not make the decision to move forward with this project at this time. And again, I hope I'm wrong, but this seems indicative of some of the future projects and what we're going to see here going forward. But Ed, is there anything that you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you've covered it pretty well. The costs we think are going to be kind of nominal. I don't think they're going to be outrageous, huge costs. Otherwise, maybe we would have considered rebidding it or something like that. But the fact that we have the units and we will have them in hand when we need them, we may even see some benefits like less downtime because we're not waiting on stuff. So we're still working through that. So you may not have to go into the school year like we were planning to this year. So maybe some benefits that come out of it, but we're keeping a close eye on it.
So that is just for information at this time, and we will have more information, as we go throughout the year. However, on a good note, the HVAC project at South Campus is up and running and going very well at this point, and so that one we anticipate, I think, at this point, still be done on time.
Yep, everything is moving as it should, and maybe a little ahead of time, but I'm not committing to that yet.
Don't say that yet, Ed.
We didn't hear that, yeah. Awesome.
So, any additional questions, be happy to answer on that at all.
Nope. 'Cause
Okay.
I think we have a lot to cover for the next item. Under
Yes,
facilities.
moving on.
Sorry, are we talking about the Summers project still, Brian?
No, that's it.
Just one thing I would add that came to light after the board packet went out, the paving project going on at South Campus. So you may see that it's been opened and there's debris there right now. The quarries went on strike last week, and so we can't get aggregate at the moment or dump the material currently. So it's going to be sitting for a little bit. We're hopeful that this isn't going to be a long strike because of the amount of construction and highway work that's going on. Something's going to have to get resolved or everything's going to hit a grinding halt here pretty soon. I believe the word is that they're going to be out of concrete this week in the Chicagoland area because the aggregate that has to go in the concrete. So right now it's sitting. Like I said, hopefully that gets resolved, and if not, we'll have to figure out alternative means, but that's where things are.
Ed, could you define aggregate so everybody knows?
Aggregate is basically the stone, so the stone that goes into the concrete, the stone that's in the asphalt, the stone that the asphalt sits on. There's a lot of components. The timing was very strategic in order to leverage all the work that's out there. So, unfortunately, the lot was already opened ahead of that happening. It's a shorter project, so we do have time to recover. It's not like it was going to take the entire summer, so we'll keep you abreast of that.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, we just learned about that at our construction meeting last week, so we'll have some more information on that, hopefully better information moving forward.
Yeah. Okay.
Any additional questions before we move off of that topic?
Keep it rocking and rolling.
That's the goal. There's a lot of things that are trying to get in our way, that I can tell you,
Yes.
unfortunately.
Yes. We're not going to be one of them, but yes.
Okay. I think we can go on to the next topic here. and-
Facilities, 2022 facilities project, oh, sorry. I can't talk anymore, it's been a long day. Potential summer projects for 2023.
Yes, and I want to apologize. I think most of the, 477 page, or 474 page document
is.
now is upon us here. So I know that there's a lot of information here because you have our list of projects, you have the facilities plan, you have the life safety items as well. And so I know there's a lot of information here. And again, remember, as you may recall, this is just a first look at what we're looking at and what we're talking about here at the district level to say, what do our projects, what are we looking at for the following summer? So this is for the summer of 2023. This is not for this year. This is for next year. With the goal to, get a first look tonight and then come back in August and then authorize the bid specifications so that we can move forward. Just to, Ed, can you just give us a quick update on the construction market, what's going on, what's happening out there, and why we're not particularly, anyone's in a good position right now to be running construction projects?
Yeah, so obviously, supply chain issues, delays on things getting here. China being a big one where a lot of components are made when they shut down ports and close for COVID. We can't get stuff, it gets backed up. The war in Ukraine's caused quite a bit of trouble. We've had factories get bombed that produce materials for our products, so that's been a challenge as well. We're still dealing with the same issues with roofing insulation. So that's one where the prices have gone up about 30% from what they have been previously, and that's usually a pretty steady area. But because of the shortages, those are up right now. Hopefully that normalizes, but that's a concern, and there's still kind of long lead times for that. Mechanical equipment, depending on the type of equipment, the lead times are pretty extensive, pricing's high. Chillers right now, which is important in all of our conversations about air conditioning, that's the plant that actually provides the cooling that we'll have to expand further as we do more. Those are a full 12 months out right now from the time that they're ordered. So that's going to be a struggle looking at that type of stuff, and again, costs are up. Ideally, not ideally, but traditionally what we see is this is going to dip at some point. When that's going to hit, is it next year? Is it in 6 months? Traditionally, that's going to go back down, and you're going to get projects that are going to be more affordable than they were in the past, but right now things are going to be more expensive, and we're going to run the risk of not being able to get things when we need them. So some of the projects reflected in here that Brian's going to talk about are strategies to look at things that we think we can tackle, that we should be able to get through, and some are just, kind of reference for items we've been looking at for a long time.
Thanks, Ed. I think that's important to kind of, color where we're headed with some of these projects, at least at this particular point. That being said, so let's just kind of focus on the beginning on page 130. You'll see the list of, this is a spreadsheet that we put together essentially from the district perspective. We talk amongst ourselves, obviously administratively, Brad Drake and Kevin Bertolotti very heavily involved in this as well as Paul and Ed from DLA. And we start to, we put this list together. Again, this list has multiple points of data from it, right? It has first of all, what some of the on lines 3 through 7, what some of those projects that are rising to the top are for us right now. Lines 9 through 20 are projects that are essentially right there. They're close to those yellow projects, but they're also, maybe, when we start looking at some of the roofing, saying, hey, look, this is a project that we're going to hold off on right now only because of those supply chain issues. And so we're prioritizing those, but we're looking really at what we think we can also, a factor that we never really had to use before, and that is what can we actually get done at this point. And then that's in that gray area. Then you go down to the green area and you see those are really, that's still from the facility study. Those are items on there that are kind of summarized from that facility study. So instead of going through all of those pages, you can see what's out here. And then in the blue, those are over the years, what has been suggested as far as certain projects. Some of them are, we can accomplish with our own B&G staff. Some of them obviously are projects that are realistic, and there are some that are more kind of, hey, look, if money's no object and time is no object, what can we can have these projects that'd be great. On line 102, there's one I want to talk about, but let me go back to beginning on line 104, the ones that are kind of in the orange. So those are the ones that we talked about from our capital request for this year. So those are new to the list. I tried to make sure that we didn't have any duplicates on here, but there may be some crossover in a couple of these. But nonetheless, these are the new ones that we talked about and we added to the list from our request for this year. So those, like I said, are the projects that we have here that we're looking at, and we're saying, okay, look, we have to try to keep in mind, of course, the fact that what we can get done. And then, of course, the other piece that we haven't talked really about is what are the costs behind all of these, right? And we know there's many millions of dollars of cost, here that are associated with this. And so we're trying to, kind of fit together the priorities of what can we get done, what can we afford, and what is top of the need in all of those categories. And so that's how these items are showing up here. That being said, there's one I want to briefly touch on, and that is the video scoreboard. I'm sorry, the scoreboard for the pool. First of all, since we had our last discussion about these in May, we've gone back and we've actually reached out to Sievert Electric and Daktronics, which is the company, by the way, that is installing the video board at Bennett Field coming up. And so actually Ed Wright had that conversation with them, and their feeling is right now for, I think it was about $12,000, they could repair the current scoreboard. I think that repair will get the board functioning the way that it otherwise normally would. Is that accurate, Ed?
That's correct.
And, it would be, I still think we have to consider looking at replacing that board because ultimately for the $12,000, we know that there are components of that board that are also, I don't want to say they're imminent failure, but we know that as we're seeing some of the failure in those components, we're going to probably continue to see that as we go forward. And so that is something that, we'd probably recommend looking at. Again, even if we said we were going to order a board today, the earliest that we would potentially have it and maybe even, installation completed, I don't know, would be the winter break. So to me, I think that's a project that we, essentially kick out till the next summer, repair the board right now, have it useful for, all the teams for next year. And then we look at, something, as far as replacing that board for, essentially from a year from now. And then we would, if there were any other repairs that were needed throughout this next year, we would make those also as we go. So that's one I know that we've heard a little bit about, we've talked about, and so I wanted to bring that back because we did do some research on that to try to figure out what we could do so that, is it really not repairable, or is it not repairable because, the recommendation is don't spend the money on this because you have an old board. And I think under the current circumstances, with us probably at least 6 to 8 months out on a new board in hand, I think the recommendation at this point is, say, let's repair that, and then, we look at a board for next year.
What'd you say the repair was?
About $12,000 is what we're estimating now. So to me, that makes sense. It doesn't make the greatest financial sense, but it makes sense to get it repaired so that we have it available for our teams. That, to me, makes the most sense. So that would be the recommendation for that, and then we move forward looking at another board, a new board for next year. I also think as we talk about scoreboards, we're going to probably eventually have to look at all of the remaining scoreboards in the district as well, because we do have multiple other boards in the field house here at North Campus, the softball field, baseball field, and so I think we'll eventually have to look at those also, from the perspective of where do we want to go with those boards. They certainly are, they're all different in how they operate, and we'll have to talk about those going forward. But I do think for, like I said, at least for the pool at South Campus, we can get this repaired and then look at, ordering a new board for next year.
Is there a provider for scoreboards that does all the sports? Like,
Yeah.
would there be a single source provider for that?
Yes,
So they could-
the company, Daktronics, that's doing the video board and the pool board, that's what they do.
And I guess, because I don't understand a lot of what goes into, what makes a scoreboard what it is, but the price point on this seems significantly higher even than the football one, so, the football field. So I guess, maybe not significantly higher, I shouldn't say, but, well, yeah, what was it, what was our football field? Was
Yeah, I
it
think we, were- it's in the ballpark. It's a
That-
similar cost to what we have for the football field.
Because this won't do video display, I mean, like, I guess I'm curious, like, what does all this entail?
Well, what we have priced out here actually is a new video board.
It is.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. So it's not sort of the old analog board that you would see in the
Right.
past. So this actually is priced
Okay.
out as a video board. Which, we've talked about that here, and we've talked about it with Ed and Paul, and I think, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of school districts that are replacing boards in their pools are also going with video boards in those as well.
We're seeing that trend. And to speak to the cost, pools are usually a little bit of an anomaly because it's a highly corrosive environment, so they're assembled a little bit differently to help resist that versus your normal boards. But yeah, that is the trend that we're seeing.
Yep.
Where is that? Is this in the gold or says video?
red.
Is this for the swimming or is this?
That's for the swimming pool at South Campus. It's line 102, and it's in red.
Oh, I can't, okay.
I know.
It's not very light over here, the glare.
Red.
Gotcha.
My
Sorry.
eyes are a little clouded.
Yeah, I have plenty of light shining right on me here, that's for
Yes,
sure, so
yes.
I apologize.
Hard to read.
Brian, where would all of the scoreboards and the fact that you said we probably need to circle back around and look at them because they're all kind of aging, they're all outdated, where would those types of improvements live in, in the facilities, capital improvement plans?
Well, ultimately, what has happened is clearly we've utilized them until they get to a point that they're, non-repairable, non-usable, or you're continuing to put money into them when it doesn't make sense, right, at that particular point. And so, that's pretty much how the district has operated. And in fact, when we went back and we did this facility study, the one in 2019, and I don't know, Ed, would you, if you did a more extensive study, would you include the scoreboards in there?
We would.
Okay, all right. So really what was chosen at the time in 2019 were really the major components of the district, the HVAC, plumbing, electrical, the roofing structures, the parking lot structures, all of those. We did not go into, at the time, the board made the decision to put that plan together and not go into that depth of, looking at the individual classrooms, looking at, for example, the scoreboards, those types of things. So I think that it would be something potentially that as we would look to maybe in the future expand on a facilities plan, that we would go deeper in depth with that and then have those, out there.
Okay. That makes sense. So right now, the unfortunate aspect of that is right now, we don't, since it doesn't really live in a document with a projected lifespan or a projected replacing timeline, we wait until something happens to it, and then we address it, like, what you're saying about the $12,000 for a Band-Aid to get us through for the year. Hopefully, we don't have, lots of significant extra repairs during the school year. Seems to make sense to me, but
Yep.
it would be nice to have, a really, really far-reaching facilities plan that covers all those things and has the projected lifespans and replacement costs and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little tough to do in terms of accurate costs, because if you start to look out 5-10 years from now. 2 years ago, we never would have projected or predicted that a roof that we thought would cost us $1 million now is $1.5 million or
Right.
$1 million or almost $2 million, right? So, but to have it, to your point, to have it on a document to say, look, which is what we do with the other facilities, right? We look at the roofs and we say, generally speaking, look, roofs are expected to last about 20 years.
Right.
And so you kind of mark that off at the 20. Now, that doesn't mean that you necessarily run right out and replace it at 20 years, but you know, look, this roof has been around for 24 years. It's starting to deteriorate. We have to replace it. So that's exactly what that would
It
look
just
like.
helps you take a better 5, 7, 10-year look at like what could be coming down the pike, you know? That's interesting. Okay. How often do you redo so the last one was done in 2019. How often, is there a customary practice, a best practice to redo facilities plans?
So generally, we're looking at most of this stuff on a pretty regular basis. You know, we're going to be up on your roofs, looking at those almost annually. It's not a full-blown audit, but we'll kind of keep an eye on it. And also your team is looking at that stuff and servicing it as well, so they may flag something that kind of jumped up on the list. In general, we may want to revisit a full-blown every 5 years or so. But that's a good amount of time to kind of, you know, we spot check things and we get feedback from the team as to where things are, but that'd be a good approach.
In this one, we originally completed in 2019. I think it was November of 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And then we, some of the projects that we ran that were, you know, part of this, we updated in January of 2021. So we'll update this again as we're going through it. So, I mean, we're certainly, like I said, with having all of that information in this document, we're continuing to obviously follow that, and that's driving, you know, our decision-making process as well. Because when you look at, if you look in the document and you look at the parking lots, you know, everything is, and parking lots are just an example. Very nicely color-coded, right? Green is good. Orange, we're starting to, you know, look at getting close to the end of useful life. Red, we're really pretty much due. Same thing is true if you look at the HVAC systems. And if you look at the amount of red on the HVAC systems, you will see that there is quite a bit, as we've talked about in the past. And so, you know, that's essentially what makes that document, I think, pretty easy to read and pretty understandable for everybody to say, okay, well, you know, what's driving the decision-making process? Well, here it is.
Yep.
Or at least partially, let's put it that way.
So, Brian, I'm wondering about the stuff that's here in this orange section.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like, does this stuff, how does it see the light of day? Where does it see the light of day? When you've got such big, pressing, major structural things that will need a lot of attention and absorb a lot of our budget.
Yeah.
So, yeah, how do we work that in? Where will we work that in? Do we work that in? What can we do?
So it's a great question. So ultimately what will end up happening is, you know, we will work with our own B&G team to see if there are some of these items that we can knock off, you know, just by working with them. There are some items in here that are, you know, repairs, items that perhaps they can't do, but we would contract with, you know, an outside contractor to perform throughout the course of the year. And so that's where we would do those. And again, they would be based on priority, based on, you know, need, what's broken, what's not working, those types of things. And then after that, you know, look, there are some items that are probably going to sit out here for an extended period of time, because, you know, as we talked about, not only do we have the need for, you know, we have to maintain everything large and small in the district. Right. And one of the issues, of course, is when you look at a roofing project, well, that's going to probably take up anywhere from $1 million to $2 million just on one roof alone. And so, you know, you try to work in as many of these other items as you can as you go through the course of time. But, you know, some of them will probably sit out there for some extended period of time.
Yeah, because, I mean, to me, none of it is like really frivolous. It's very, you know.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
They're not frivolous requests, you know.
Yeah,
There
no.
really isn't anything that shows up on this list.
No.
That doesn't seem worthy. So it's hard to make those decisions. So would you guys be coming back to us because so many other things are at play between probably now and August? Maybe not that much at play, but
Yeah.
there might be with strikes and supply chain, things like that. So
Yes.
would August look different? This chart would look different? Is that where you'd give us different priorities?
Yeah, so what we'll continue to do is a couple of things. I don't feel, the ones that we have in the yellow, that's not going to change, right? Those priorities are still going to be there. Ultimately, as we talked about, perhaps the video scoreboard for the pool would then get put up there as well, based on what we know right now. We could also see something else pop up that we don't even have on the list, kind of as we were just talking about earlier. But we will continue to go through this list, see what we believe we can accomplish. Does something change in the supply chain? Does does pricing start coming down, and we can take a look at that as well. Those are all questions and things that we'll have to continue to look at. But yes, the goal is to bring you this finalized list in August with the recommendations, from the administrative perspective. And of course, then we have to look at the other part of this, and that is, beside the need, the timing, what can we get done, and then what do we want to put into the budget for next year. And so, I do have a little better idea in August of any surplus from this year's budget that we can utilize going forward. And so initially, I will tell you that my thought was for next year that we'd be maybe in the $2 to $3 million range. There could be more. I think it's important for us to look at, again, like I said, what surplus we would have from this year's budget, and again, we had a revenue source that was well over what we anticipated as far as budgeting goes. So those things play a part in what we look at, and then utilizing some of the reserves potentially for these projects. We just have to keep in mind that we don't want to keep going into reserves every year and utilizing those funds. They're a good source for those, but you also never know when you could have something else that comes up that isn't even building related, right? It could be, all of a sudden the state of Illinois decides they're going to pass off some cost to us related to the pension funds. And now you're looking at having to put, maybe $2 or $3 million a year aside for that. I'm making these numbers up. I'm just giving an example. But those are the kinds of things that, you might have to utilize reserves for at some point as well until you restructure some of the finance. And again, I'm not trying to paint any sort of bleak picture for us. That's not the case. But it's a matter of juggling all of those and keeping everything on track so that, as we were talking about earlier, one of our goals in the strategic planning is to make sure that the district stays financially sound and has a financial profile score of recognition with the state of Illinois. And there's quite a few factors that go into that. And once you start, spending down reserves, that's an okay thing to do, but that does start to change your financial profile score as well. So again, we're not anywhere near that conversation yet, but I think it's important for us to keep that, at the forefront too, the finance part of it and how much we're willing to spend. And like I said, in August, we'll certainly have some more, better idea of what this year's budget or final actually budget looks like, and it'll be interesting to see. There's some of those factors for next year. I have no good way to predict them, especially that corporate personal property replacement tax line item. Great this year. Will it be that same way next year? I don't know. I don't know that yet. So
We're counting on it.
yeah, I'm hoping, but
Yeah, fingers crossed and toes.
yeah. So anyway, so like I said, you have a lot of information here. We're going to look at this list again. We'll bring back some final, thoughts and recommendations for the board. But again, this, the ones in yellow aren't going to change. Could there be some others that move up, as we talked about the scoreboard? Yes, that certainly will move up as well. And then we'll, even the ones in yellow, I don't know particularly that we would be recommending all of those. But certainly the roofing, we talked about the clay tile roofing here at North Campus. That's on the list. It's a high priority. They're in red. And it's one that, as Ed would tell you, isn't necessarily affected by the insulation piece of this right now. So that's a benefit to us to run that project because we potentially could avoid some of those delays. I don't know, Ed, anything else that you want to add to that at all?
I think everyone's tired of hearing me talk.
No, not at
Me or you? Which one?
A little both.
Just one with the ceiling fan and the shop. I mean, it looks like that's like a safety and student health concern.
Yeah.
It's like $5,400.
So that's one of the projects I will talk with our B&G staff about and see what we can do with that, if we can get some fans in there. certainly there may be an opportunity to do that. And we can also potentially look at, bringing a contractor in also to get that work done as well. So that's one that we wouldn't necessarily, have to have as a summer project, right? We could do that and get some of that in there as we go.
And then I just have one tiny little question from a housekeeping. That column that says architect and ACM, what's ACM?
Asbestos containing material.
Okay, thanks. That's
Yeah.
not what I thought you were going to say, but that's
Yeah.
fine.
And the reason that's sort of a separate column there is because it's a separate
It's a
cost
cost,
to the
yeah.
project.
We've
So,
seen it.
yeah, we have one contractor going to perform the work, and then we have the separate contractor that's going to remove the asbestos. In almost, well, I don't say almost every, but most of our projects that we touch will generally have some sort of ACM that has to be removed.
Wow, thanks, you guys. Thanks for sticking around. Appreciate it.
No problem.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good
Thanks.
night.
Great night. Take care. Thank you. I think next up we have finance because we have one more visitor. I think Brian's district financial investment update.
We do, and thank you for allowing us to move. Charlie has been very patient there from PMA.
And Kathy, don't
Thanks,
forget
Charlie
Kathy.
and Kathy. Kat.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I want to briefly just talk about here today is just kind of give you an update in terms of where we are, because about a year ago now, a little less than a year ago, we were leaving the Lyons Township Treasurer's Office. And as you recall, I think we had about 6 days, to get up and have a payroll out on July 2nd. So it was a pretty short turnaround. And beside my staff that did an outstanding job, we were working with Charlie and his team as well. And they were instrumental in helping us get to that point also. So I had all the faith in the world in Charlie. I have worked with Charlie at my prior district as well, and I knew we would be able to get and we did. So, kudos to Charlie and his staff as well we had a couple of moments there where there was some real question about, running that payroll and that July 2nd piece, but we were able to get it done. And again, that was really a credit to, our staff and Charlie's staff as well. So, but that being said, that's not really what we want to talk about tonight. We just kind of briefly want to talk about the process of investing district funds. And so we could not have potentially picked a worse time to try to reestablish an investment portfolio, really on a couple of levels. The first one was we left the jurisdiction of the TTO. At the time, interest rates were still around 0.
That's correct.
Yeah. So there really wasn't much investing that we did. We held to some of the funds. They're all invested in the Illinois School District Liquid Asset Fund. But I don't know what we were earning, a basis point or two,
A couple
maybe?
basis points, that's correct.
Yeah. So it was very small. They were all invested. But trying to get to some of those more long-term investments, we literally waited a little bit on some of those to kind of see where some of these interest rates, were going to go. We finally did get to the point of investing, a good portion of our dollars. And really, we went out, we bought some investments, and since we purchased those investments, things have continued to get better, with interest rates continuing to increase. And in fact, Charlie and I were talking before the meeting, there's another anticipated Fed increase of roughly 75 basis points, so 0.75% on Wednesday, another increase to that. So as some of our current investments start to roll off, mature, we're going to be buying back into, right now at least, some investments that are going to be even much higher than what we see right now. But again, as you know, and when you deal with the financial market, you could look at it, a potential investment at 1 o'clock today, and if you go to pull the trigger on it at 3 o'clock today, it might look different than what it was, 2 hours ago. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, but we do know that interest rates are rising, which is good for us, not necessarily great for consumers, as we know. So that being said, I wanted to have Charlie just kind of briefly talk with us today, kind of talk about the process, go through, really kind of explain to you what the ISLAF, the Illinois School District Liquid Asset Fund account is, how we handle our investments, utilizing a cash flow management system and then tiering those investments to meet for the district. So, Charlie, why don't you go ahead and want to talk about? So we're essentially starting right now. I had the page written, page 4-5 of your packet, and Charlie, that's the one that begins.
Did you guys read all 455 pages?
Yeah, 455. And Charlie, that's the one that begins with essentially what I have in the packet right now is your.
Kind of how the night feels.
The title page.
5 pages long.
That is the one, Charlie, that begins with your picture on it and in your PowerPoint there. So why don't you just kind of take us through that and go from there.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks again for having the opportunity to speak today. So this is my first time in front of the board, and again, kind of the first time we're working with the district in an official capacity as well. So I did have a couple of presentations here. We'll spend some time on a couple, but kind of give you a little glimpse of at least the PMA overview of who I am, what we do. Again, I'm Charlie Zach. I'm a Senior Vice President with PMA. I've been there for over 20 years. PMA has, for the last 35 years, worked exclusively with public funds. That's school districts, community colleges, municipalities. Collectively, we serve over 4,000 entities in 14 different states. We are in Naperville, right off of 59 and 88. There's a complex of office buildings. That's where our world headquarters are. We have a number of satellite offices throughout the Midwest, primarily, and whatnot. Total employees about 150 employees across probably all of our states. As of when I put this together, we have about $30 billion in total assets under management there. So just kind of a brief background of what PMA is. So let's move on to that next slide, and we'll talk about the Liquid Asset Fund. So we call it ISLAF. It's a lot of words to say all in one time, but it's the Illinois School District Liquid Asset Fund, of which Lyons Township High School is a member, and was officially a member as of July. So PMA is employed by the Liquid Asset Fund. We're the fund administrator, the marketer, and the advisor for that pool. We answer to a board of directors of ISLAF, which is comprised of folks like yourself. There are a couple school board members, one from Elgin off the top of my head, a superintendent, several business managers, and formerly some township treasurers on the board as well. So we do report to that board. And the Liquid Asset Fund is essentially a money market pool for school districts. So school districts pool their money, and for the value that you get in that is the economies of scale and being able to achieve some better interest earnings through that fund. The fund itself is the money market portion. We also offer a number of different services, including fixed income investments and our cash flow management program. So instead of having all of our dollars sit in a liquid balance, we will identify the cash flow. Let's say, hey, invest dollars 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 20 months, 24 months down the road. And the advantage of that is in a typical interest environment, the yield curve is steep. That means simply that you're compensated more for the longer you lock up dollars. So we try to take advantage of that wherever possible. I'm going to go on to the next slide, and that's going to talk about our investment procedure. The first thing we put in place is what we call a cash flow analysis. So when we took over the district's account last July, working with Brian, one of our first goals was to put in a cash flow. What does your cash flow actually look like? And we're going to get to that here in a couple slides. It goes through a formal organizations of what's your high point in terms of fund balances, what's your low point in terms of fund balances, and let's map out a plan that goes around that. When we actually go to do the investments, we get on to those next couple bullet points, which would be the risk management. We go through investment objectives, credit quality, and then what is the district allowed to invest in. I've got a slide to cover that as well. As public funds, it's a very plain vanilla approach. We can't be buying derivatives and stocks and cryptocurrencies and things like that. It's safety of principle, liquidity, and yield are the three tenets of public funds investing in that order. Right, making sure you get return on principal, have enough liquidity to meet your expenditures, and then finally yield. So what I've got on the next slide here is this pie chart. This is kind of a breakout. The cash flow analysis gets much more in depth, and we go by fund and things like that. But this is the aggregate analysis of the high school district's revenues and expenditures. And if you look at that top chart, pie chart there, this is very indicative of most of these schools in northern Illinois, very heavily dependent on property taxes for your sources of revenue. In fact, in this district, 92% of district's funds come from local property taxes, which an additional 5% is coming from local, and from federal, and 3% from state. And what we have on that bar chart to the right, you'll see two different colors. You'll see the timing of when you receive those taxes. So the blue is our traditional. It's what we had the previous year. So being in county, generally you pay your property taxes twice a year. It's generally due March 1st, August 1st. This year is something different. If you guys have been made aware of it, but taxes are going to be delayed this year. The county assessor is pointing fingers at some other people in the bureaucracies, and there's potential that you may not receive your typical bill, which would due August 1st, is now projected December, possibly until January. So when we ran this analysis, you'll see a spike right in the middle of the chart there, in that light blue area in December. We started to project that you're not going to receive those revenues to December. And so we really want to know, worst case scenario, what does your cash flow look like should those property taxes be delayed?
Charlie, I think there's also some discussion right now, too, correct me if I'm wrong, if you've heard this, that the March collection may also be delayed because potentially the politicians are concerned that, there'd be two collections within a couple of months of each other. Have you heard anything along those lines?
So that would be a kind of a PR standpoint. There's no reason they should do that, but agreed. If you delay it till December or January, there might be some PR say, well, we can't just make you pay it. You just paid it. Let's delay it a couple more months. Mm-hmm. So no headwind on that. I mean, that's certainly a headwind, but it's just speculation at this point.
Right.
Okay. On the expenditure analysis down there at the bottom, this would be, what are we spending on? This is going to come as no surprise to all of you. Your people are the most expensive portion. Salaries and benefits make up anywhere from 70–80% of most districts' basis. If you want to add up 56 and 12, that's what we have with this district as well, closing in about 70%. We also map out when you do expend your funds, actually, and you'll see there, and I was just talking to Brian about this the other day, June is when you cut a lot of payroll checks all for the entire summer. And that's not uncommon, but unique that you actually do disperse the checks as opposed to just kind of making it an account entry. So that's why we see the upward trend in spikes. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. And really this slide is we call this our mountain graph, and there's a lot of data on here, but this is kind of what we do. This is the whole analysis in a nutshell. And what that is that as that trend line goes down, you see those mountains, it's very, again, as I spoke before, very indicative of northern Illinois counties in that they get two giant spikes. And you see those spikes in retrospect in that August, September range. You spend all your fund balances down, and then it jumps back up in March. And you drag it all the way down until September. Well, and what we're seeing, what I want to have you point to is right in the middle of that chart, we'll see it bringing down all the way to December. And you can see that's the biggest dip that we could possibly have, we've had when we're doing these type of analysis. And that's, again, to be conservative in case funds don't come in, because property taxes don't come in. But the bright spot is that dip doesn't make you negative. There are a lot of districts in Cook County that it's going to do that. If those property taxes don't get hit, there are a wide range of districts that have debt service payments due on December 1st. And there's a lot of districts scrambling to say, how are we going to make that payment if we don't receive property taxes?
And again, that goes to the fact that we have the fund balances available to continue operating. And as Charlie pointed out, if that number would be projected to go negative, that means the district does not have enough cash on hand. That doesn't mean that you don't have enough money long term, but it means you don't have enough cash on hand. And what districts have to do then is they have to go out and borrow short-term or take short-term loans to actually, fund payroll, fund accounts payable. And of course, anytime you take a loan, you're paying additional on that as well.
Right. So again, this analysis is twofold. In this case, we ran this to say, okay, is the district going to be okay? Yes, you're going to be okay if you don't even receive your property taxes in December. Hopefully that doesn't come to fruition. But then number two, let's identify what that low point is. In this case, you're still well above $10 million. And then we try to structure an investment plan going around it. So there's some different color coding as you look through that chart. We'll have in those light blue sections, we'll have money market funds, liquid funds. In that sea blue, I guess if you call it, that would be more of our intermediate investments. That's where we're going to be just-in-time funding expenditures, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And then that blue, that dark navy blue section, that would be hey, we've identified these dollars as reserve dollars. So how do we handle reserve dollars? Are we taking guesses on where interest rates are go? No, our strategy is generally a laddered approach. Hey, we have X amount of dollars. We have $10 million that are reserve dollars. Let's ladder that out in CDs and government agencies and treasuries out 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years, so that once that ladder's in place, every time an investment comes due, about back another 2 years to always be taking advantage of whatever the yield curve might be giving us at that point. And I just want to pause there before I kind of move on. Okay, so this next page, this is kind of what a daily cash flow might look like. So I picked out a specific months here. This is December 2022, and as you go read from left to right, we have revenues on the left, expenditures on the right. I call my asset liability matching column on the right, and that is taking just-in-time funding our expenses. So as we look through this, you're going to receive in your revenues, like you're going to get 2 EBF payments a month. I show for visual purposes, but this will go the whole month, and Brian's got a whole of it, and we do 24 months. This is just one particular month, but we'll see when you get your taxes in, when you get your education-based funding in, and anything other would be federal, state. Federal or state type smaller amounts. But really, what drives the cash flow is that middle column. Is we know we're going to have a couple payrolls each month, and we know we're going to have a couple payables. So we try to identify what those are. And then what we do in that third column is have an investment come due to meet those expenditures. Okay? And the far right column would be that we're always going to maintain a liquid balance. It's going to be identified as something we work out with Brian. It could be something $5 million. It could be $10 million. In recent times, our liquid balances have been greater just simply because the yields that were present were not worth pursuing. So on to the next slide. And what you can see here, this is actually a snapshot of what we've been investing over the past, I guess, 11 months now, 10 months. And we'll have, as we move from top to bottom, that we have a liquid and a max, and those are the money market funds. So we're keeping quite a few dollars liquid. And then you can start to see, as we look down at the purchase date, but I want to have you more focus on the maturity date, and you in time funding some of these expenses. So we have a couple of investments coming due in June, 2 in July, 4 in August, September, October, December, and that's really trying to obtain yield where we can in safe type investments, and you'll see the type on the side. SEC would be security, CD would be certificate deposit. So again, I've got a slide here to talk about what the district can permissibly invest in. I'll get to that here in a minute. But again, you see, started doing this portfolio, rates were at 0%, and I'll talk about that, touch on that as well. It wasn't until a few months ago the Fed started raising rates, and really that became as a shock to the market. So see some of these, we went from as low as 5 basis points into the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 90s, now into the 1%, and now as we start to invest here, we're going to see some investments hit into the 2% now as well. So again, from an investment perspective, the rising rates is a good thing. I think if we look back at historical AFRs, you would see your interest income was probably pretty nice, enough dollars. The last 2 years, it's going to go down to nothing. So, but it's going to come back here again as we come up, finish this fiscal year, and certainly go into the next. So I did just what is an allowable investment vehicle here. I've got that tied out there. We go by, first and foremost, you can't ever be more aggressive than state statute, but you can be more conservative. So there's things that state statute allows that, hey, maybe I don't want to have that. So what we do is we reference your investment policy, and your investment policy is very straightforward and clear on what you can invest on. So that go to the next slide. That'll talk about some of the basics that I kind of already mentioned a few of these items. And these are Illinois state statute investments. This is the Public Funds Investment Act. What can you buy? U.S. Treasuries, only the safest form of debt in the world. That would be Treasury bills, Treasury notes, Treasury bonds. U.S. agencies also up there. That would be of the government, such as the Federal Home Loan Banks and Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, agencies of the federal government. Then we also have more traditional banking products. SDA would be a savings deposit account. We have certificates of deposits, whether they be insured or collateralized. We utilize FDIC insurance. Is bank you can place a CD with was up to $250,000 under FDIC. Anything above that has to be collateralized. Are putting any investments in any types of banking institutions without some type of backing beyond the $250,000. I'm not going to go through each one of these, but these are the basics of the money market fund and cash management. Okay. So what I do want to touch on here is that we've mentioned this several times. So this is the yield curve. I ran this as of May 31st. That wasn't that long ago, but it's actually been a little bit eventful, especially since this last Friday. But what I'll have you take a look at is that green line at the top. That's our current yield curve. The two lines below that are where we were at 6 months ago and 12 months ago. And from the ones from 6 and 12 months ago, I'll have you look at, as you go out from 1M, that's 1 month, out to basically 1 year was 0. So 6 months ago, 1 year ago, we were basically at a 0% interest rate environment, anywhere from 1 month to 1 year. You had to go out to 10 years to get, something into the 1% range at that time. But now what happened is in late September, September of 2021, the Federal Reserve in their meeting finally took away what the word they had been using was called transitory. They thought all this inflationary talk was transitory. That was like, it's all related to COVID. Well, they removed that language, that it wasn't very transitory. It's real. Inflation is very real. And what happened is the markets started to increase in a fashion that we haven't seen in 40 years, how quickly rates. So you can see where we're at as of today, or I should say this, as of 2 weeks ago, that steepness in the yield curve. We now have an overnight rate that is approaching 50, 60, 70 basis points. We have 1-year rates that are now at 2%. We have 2-year rates that are at 250. But then, of course, the rate, we do flatten out going on there. So again, I just wanted to highlight again, we'll be investing in this higher rate environment, but it was very sudden and very unexpected. I'm going to move forward to the next one, and this is a lot of information on this chart, but I want to point out to this is when the Fed meets. So we're looking at the probabilities of the Fed increasing rates. So that far left column is when the Fed meets. So today's June 13th. They meet on here on Wednesday. When I ran this was on May 31st. There was a 200% chance of a rate hike. 100% would be 25 basis points. 200% would be 50. So there was basically certainty that the market's expecting the Fed to raise rates by 50 basis points in June. The inflation number came out on Friday at 8.6%. It was trending at 8.3% before that. That spooked the markets. So we saw rates jump again just from Friday to Monday here. So Brian mentioned the possibility of 75 here on Wednesday. That was a 3% chance in this. It's now a 30% chance. So it might be 75, but it's certainly well within the realm of possibility that we'll see 75 basis points. And then the Fed, so prior to Friday, there was a universal consensus the Fed was going to raise 50 in June, 50 in July. Now, I think that's at bare minimum is going to happen. There may be a 75 in there as well, and then you can kind of go see and go down. But what this chart is showing is that by February of 2003, so we're, a little, what is that, a little less than a year from now, a Fed overnight rate of somewhere in the 280s, 285. So that could be looking at, that's what the markets are projecting right now. But as Brian mentioned before, look at 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock, it's completely something different. That's just kind of the world we're in right now. The inflationary pressures are very real. Markets are spooked by them. And whenever we see something that is more inflationary in tone, we're going to see interest rates rise. So that is what I have planned to speak there. I know that I'm working with the district on a lot of different things. I'd be happy to take any questions. I know looking at Bloomberg slides at 10:50 at night and talking about Fed probabilities is
I like it because
I just made a note, bring Charlie back again.
Yes.
So another time.
So we do this, so again, this is our first year kind of working with the district specifically. That cash flow plan is updated, And the district has assigned someone in our office, it's myself and another gentleman at this time, that if something changes, like you were mentioning some of these projects from DLA, if all of a sudden a $2 million roof was needed overnight, which probably isn't going to happen, but we have that liquidity built in, and then we also have the ability to adjust on the fly as well.
Great, thank you.
Charlie, thanks. It's a lot of information there. I thought it was important just to kind of bring this back
Great.
to the board to kind of take a look at what has changed since, we left the jurisdiction of the Township Treasurer's Office. And this, of course, is one of the components because we never had any of the investing opportunities at all. That was always the Treasurer's Office that was doing that for us in the past. And so, the payroll components, all those things, obviously, you would have heard a long time ago if we weren't completing those in the piece that, was out there. And I thought it was important to, like you said, have Charlie come in, explain to the board how we operate. And it's really, this is just a quick snapshot of what's going on because this is an ongoing process, ongoing all the time. So we'll have a maturity. If you look back on that spreadsheet that we had there was like $13 million it said on 6/1. That's because we had a maturity that date and we were anticipating all those payrolls for June. So now we're working through that money. We'll see if there's anything in the next couple of months here that's, that we don't need. We can go back out and reinvest. And so it's an ongoing process. I think it's fun, but that's just me. So, like I said, we'll obviously continue to do that and obviously keep in mind what we need to have available so that we're not breaking investments and those types of things. We'll have some more information for the board. Currently, as when we publish this, we had $38.2 million in fixed rate investments. So, and again, that number will vary. That will go up and down. And as we go through time here without, we're set up to do that, but as we go through time, if those taxes are delayed, certainly we could come down to a point where we have only $10 million invested, but that's because we're utilizing that cash to operate. Any other questions before we leave that topic? I know it's a lot, and I know it's late. And Charlie, thank you for sticking around as late as you did. I appreciate that.
Thank you, everybody.
So,
Thanks, Kathy and Charlie.
have a safe ride home, Charlie. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, guys.
Kathy.
Appreciate it. Okay, we can move on to the final agenda item in finance, depository signers update.
Yeah, this is just really quick. So again, as part of our leaving the Township Treasurer's Office, we now have control of all of these bank accounts. And one of the tasks we are required to perform on an annual basis is to have the board review and approve both the depositories and signers on those accounts. So really what they are, they're just simply the bank accounts that we operate from. And so you have a list of those there. You have the, let me just pull that up here. I don't have that one in front of me right now. So you have, as we talked about, the ISLAF accounts, the general fund, which we deposit money into, payroll, and then accounts payable. And you'll see the signers on those accounts are myself and Dr. Waterman. And then also the BMO Harris accounts, which, by the way, those are in conjunction with the ISLAF accounts, but those are the actual accounts that we operate out of. So the ISLAF accounts that you see up above have the same account numbers, but then they have the BMO Harris numbers that are attached with them. So BMO Harris is the company that actually has the contract to do the banking through ISLAF. So that's how, all of our checks are generated, and those are through Harris Bank. And then also down at the bottom, you have the student activity accounts, the scholarship account, and student exchange accounts. And again, Dr. Waterman and myself are on those accounts. So all we would simply do is ask the board on, what night is the next Tuesday night, next Tuesday night, to simply just approve those for the fiscal year FY23. So that's the upcoming year, and then we will approve those on an annual basis going forward. Again, something new because of the leaving the Township Treasurer's Office.
Okay, I think that's good. Sounds great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes finance. Okay, we have policy. Ed Piotrowski. First reading for Press 109.
Thank you, President Dillon. On page 368 of the board's materials, we do have Press 109 as a first read for this month. We have it broken into 3 sections, as we have in previous editions of the press revisions. Section 1 are policies that are just up for a 5-year review. We have 4 policies up for a 5-year review this month. None of those policies have had changes over those 5 years, and press recommends that we review them every 5 years and reapprove at the board level. So those 4 policies that are listed in Section 1 are recommending to approve as a 5-year review or a 5-year update when we do get to the second reading in August. Section 2, these are 5 policies that have changes that are administrative in nature. None of the changes affect how the policies are interpreted or the administration of those policies. The changes really are updates to legal references, footnotes, terminology, or responses to recent legislation. Those policies are listed below as well. There are no substantive changes, so we are making that recommendation to approve those as well once we hit that second reading in August. And finally, Section 3, these are the policies that we do seek additional review from our council. As a reminder, all of these policies are reviewed by the Illinois Association of School Boards and their through their legal. Section 3 policies are also reviewed by our district council as well. We sent policies to them for review this month. Policy 230, which may seem familiar or may look familiar. This is the public participation at board meetings policy, which the board just approved a pretty substantial revision. And then policy 7285, which is access prevention, response, and management program. Just speaking briefly about these two, and I do apologize for the forensic memo not being included in the original materials, but I sent that to the board this morning, so hopefully everyone's had a chance to take a look at that. Briefly, policy 2230, the public participation at the board meetings. Forensic is recommending that we do not need to make any changes. Policy that was just rewritten essentially for us in previous months. If the board does to accept the recommendations of press, it doesn't really change the additional information, but at this time, Forensics recommendation is that we don't make any of those changes. And then finally, policy 7285. Forensic did have some recommendation changes. Those recommendations are included in Forensics at the bottom of page 1 and page 2. Long and short of all is that the Illinois State Board of Education has a model school policy, and Forensics recommendations are saying is that the language that press is recommending goes beyond the ISB model school policy in terms of the board policy. Those items need to be included in the actual administrative procedures, and we do those. But very similar to when we were having a discussion about graduation Press 108, Forensics recommendation was we don't need to spell out all of the different places where we talk about, Leif Erikson Day or something like that within social studies, as long as we have that within our offerings. It's a very similar response here that if you look at Forensics response, it says, we want to make sure that these are with ISB's model school policy and that it better aligns with ISB's model school policy. Obviously, this is a first read and a preliminary first read at that right now. We'll much more time to discuss at the first read on Tuesday evening, as well as into August as well. But at this time, I'm happy to answer questions that the board might have.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. And it was included in the hard copy packets that we received.
Okay, excellent.
So we did get the Forensic memo.
Well, there you go. Thank you.
Okay, I guess we can move on then next. Human Resources. Back to you, Ed. Our first agenda is the Stipend Committee recommendations.
Absolutely. So each year we meet approximately 4 times with the Stipend Committee. It's once per quarter. We met 5 times due to the number of requests at one of the meetings, but then we do bring recommendations to the Board of Education. These recommendations that we bring forward are recommendations that have financial implications, not the approval of things moving, once they move out of a status and we make the recommendation to attach a stipend, we bring those to the Board of Education. This month we do have 2 club activities that recommending for full activity recognition and associated stipends. Those are Round Net Club and Yoga and Wellness Club. We're recommending the same 2.64% stipend for each one, which is approximately $1,400. That is the minimum stipend that we have, which equates to essentially meeting once per week for an hour over the course of the school year. Both of these clubs, Round Net Club and Yoga and Wellness, have been meeting for quite some time. Round Net Club 2021 school year, and Yoga and Wellness began in March 2021. They both have healthy enrollments. They both have a lot of interest from students. In the case of the interest from students has actually spawned into some financial consideration and backing by both the LTHS boosters and the Parent-Teacher Council to provide equipment for our students to play. And then Yoga and Wellness Club, I know we've spoken in the past about curricular offerings and the yoga class that we are now offering over here at our North Campus, and how the enrollment for that has just skyrocketed. So having a yoga club that can complement curricular offering, but then also serve as a driver to get interest for students to take those, are certainly things that the stipend committee felt were appropriate. We make the recommendation to approve these stipends at the board meeting on Tuesday. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
And I don't have any questions on these two particular, just are there any other pilots that were not approved?
There were no other pilots that were not approved, no.
And then we still have some going into next year that will continue on.
Absolutely, and we'll continue to review them, absolutely. Typically, it's on a one-year basis, but sometimes it's a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. Obviously, the pandemic made things longer. Things might go shorter if an instance of something that might go shorter was lifeguarding club because of the need. We accelerated that pilot status and moved it into, but typically it's that year.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, then Ed, second agenda item is the classified non-contractual handbook.
Thank you, President Dillon. Typically each year in the spring, April, May, or June, we come to the Board of Education with recommendations for our handbooks, and it's the two handbooks that aren't associated with collective bargaining agreements. This month we are recommending the classified non-contractual handbooks, and in a subsequent action item or a subsequent item, the administrative handbook. Each year we meet with representatives from the classified non-contractual work group. That is a work group that includes clerical staff, administrative assistants, student assistants who are security guards, and our technology services staff. We meet to discuss any changes to the handbook. It's what governs benefits. It's what governs provisions of their role, probation, things along those lines. We did meet this year on May 19th, short of traditional changes that we would have, the dates of the particular calendar moving forward. And as you may recall, the state of Illinois is in the middle of a minimum wage increase all the way up through January 5. So the only changes that we've had to these handbooks last year when they've been approved were changes to the dates, for including the new school calendar, as well as any of our student workers that might have wages increased based on the increase minimum wage. Those are the changes that we've made to this at this time. So we will recommendation to approve both the classified non-contractual and the classified non-contractual supervisor handbooks at Tuesday's meeting. And I'm happy to answer any questions if the board has any.
I would just ask, for the memo that you wrote, just to update the name that you were addressing.
Which one?
Got Dr. Calvary's on.
Yeah.
Oh, I apologize for that. I will make that change.
I was having a time warp moment there. I was like,
I think it was page 400.
I apologize for that. I apologize for that. Thank you, Jill.
394 at the top.
Good catch. Absolutely. Thank you very much. We will make that change. Unfortunately, the materials for Tuesday will absolutely make
just for the final record.
I will white them all out on everybody's.
Yeah. Okay. And then our agenda tonight is the administrator handbook. Back to you, Ed.
Thank you very much, President Dillon. Similar to the classified non-contractual handbook, this is a handbook which speaks about benefits and provisions of certified administrative staff. You may recall that based on the creation of two new administrative positions and Dr. Waterman being named superintendent, The administrative handbook last year underwent some pretty significant changes, including a new organizational chart and the inclusion of the positions. We do not have any changes to that for next year, so the administrative handbook is identical to what it was approved in August and September of 2021. Any questions? And this one does have Brian as a
Sounds good.
the page numbering, we go through and review it just before it gets submitted, just in case there's any formatting of it with the indexing. Absolutely. And we'll do that with all the handbooks and any negotiated agreement, right?
It's like automatic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think that wraps up our agenda item. Normally now we would go into the non-related portion of public comments. I think we had somebody signed up.
Yeah, we have one, but clearly she's not here.
We have an empty room. Yeah, I don't think anyone wanted to stick around. So maybe a person can join us next week. So on that note, the time is 11:06. Is there an emotion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks so much. Thank you, weather. Oh, geez.